Welcome back to the show. I think this is episode, I don't know what episode this is, 13, 14, 15, somewhere around there?
15,000.
15, 15,000? Okay.
Yeah, this is our 15,000th episode. So
All right. How's it going, Ken? How you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Yeah, how are you doing?
Not too bad. Just
How are the chickens today?
hanging it. Dude, I had the craziest dream actually last night where I was like picking up these little chicks. I was gonna look up what this dream means, and they're like full of worms and like maggots and stuff like that. It was kind of
Wow.
Yeah, it was sort of that's a way to start the show. It was kind of disturbing actually, but I don't remember. I
Wow.
was thinking like, was I actually disturbed or was I just like intrigued with what was going on? But yeah,
Well,
it
that's
was pretty.
interesting.
I didn't remember that until a little bit ago. Yeah, it was kind
No,
of
I
crazy.
just asked you. Yeah, so for those of you who missed it, Airto kind of as a hobby raises chickens.
Oh, I
And
thought you
they
said
don't.
hobby racist, and I was like, that. Yeah, that sounds about right. You know, it's something I don't
Yeah.
commit to, but I definitely give it a try.
Yeah, so as his hobby, he raises chickens and he actually collects eggs from them and eats the eggs, right? Fresh eggs.
Yeah, finally they
But
started laying again. Actually,
oh, good. But he doesn't eat the chickens. He still can't bring himself to kill those chickens. So he just has a he has more and more chickens. Every week we speak, he has more chickens and roosters and things that drive him crazy because he won't kill them and eat them, which is fine. I understand that. It's good. It's
they're actually
nice.
starting to get a little bit more mellow. Like the one that would used to attack me, I think, the primary reason I got so many chickens is because I think you need like 5 to 11 hens per rooster.
Mm.
So that's why I ended up with so many hens because I had two roosters at the time. Now I have more than the legal limit, whatever that is. You know what I mean? So, um,
3.
yeah. I think two is the
Well,
legal limit. So anything other than that,
yeah,
it's kind of
yeah.
so now I have a lot
Well,
of hens also to kind of like, but now they're like a little bit more mellow. They're a little less
oh,
aggressive.
good. Well,
Yeah.
did the weather drop? The temperature drop a little bit?
Yeah, I think today like we're in the mid low 90s, something like that, so
So
it's pretty.
that's the difference. So
Yeah.
I didn't realize that though about chickens. Those of you who tuned in and think you're gonna get about show businesses, you're gonna learn about chickens for a little bit.
Yeah.
I didn't know that chickens would ever stop laying eggs because I thought it was their reproductive cycle. I didn't think reproductive cycles were affected by weather.
Well, I don't think they're supposed to. My brothers did. They didn't stop laying the
Oh,
whole
really?
summer. Yeah, but mine did. But I think it's maybe because I have too dense of a population.
Yeah.
So but it
Hmm.
was really hot. I mean, it was like 100 something for many days. What I did realize though is when you're incubating or when you're when they're brooding, if you can keep the temperature at a steady 100, 101, 102, you'll have more males. But if you have the temperature drop down to like the 90s or something like that, or like somewhere between 90s and 100, you'll end up with more hens.
From fertilized eggs.
Yeah. So you
Well,
can actually you can
how can it
temper it.
affect it? How can it affect that? Do you
I don't
know?
know. Yeah. And I was wondering actually like if that has anything to do. I wonder if that like applies to more than one species of mammal,
Wow,
if humans have that.
I know maybe you're onto something here. We can start controlling the birth of human beings,
Yeah. So like,
sexuality based on.
they don't have to throw them in the river anymore. The females, like they do in some countries, they can just actually lower the temperature or raise the temperature.
Yeah, wow, what a world! Even that's even a, yeah. Anyhow, okay. Don't want to talk about. I thought we were going to talk
Go
about
on.
light stuff, talking about chickens, and instead now we're talking about
Straight to
killing.
politics. That's exactly what we do
Yeah.
here.
So let's get out of politics. And let's get to what we want to talk about.
Yeah.
So we were both discussing the range of the world of sitcom or half hour comedy,
Yeah.
and the two very good extremes, because they're both very successful shows for different reasons, are Atlanta and The Big Bang Theory. Atlanta, which is what I consider profound, especially compared to The Big Bang Theory, and The Big Bang Theory, which is about laughs
Hmm.
and not much content. But they're both very successful shows. Atlanta gets awards and accolades and a pretty good following. And The Big Bang Theory gets a huge following, no accolades, no awards, but tons of money
Have
for
they
the
not won any
creator.
Emmys or anything like that? The Big
No,
Bang Theory? No?
never win Emmys. I
Hmm.
think I take it back. One of the I'm thinking about the writing. We're talking about writing primarily, but
Right, right.
the show never gets nominated as an Emmy-winning show, Emmy
Hmm.
potential. But the actors and the directors, I believe, have been nominated. I think even the lead actor who plays Sheldon, I believe, won.
Hmm. Hmm.
I believe he won for best acting in an episode, but I'm not sure. Maybe he was just nominated. But Chuck Lorre has this reputation of being hugely successful for many, many years and never getting an Emmy nomination.
Hmm. What's that lady who's on the soap operas that never wins an Emmy, but she's been nominated like
Oh
80
yeah,
times or something?
yeah.
Kind of like that vibe. Yeah, I mean, the show's popular. I mean, I could see why it's popular. It's not. It wasn't. I watched the show before we decided to discuss it on our show. Um, and it's one of those shows that was in reruns, so I would catch it. It wasn't anything that I was like waiting for. I wasn't like a diehard fan. It is got some humorous elements to it, and it can be entertaining, as a show.
So
So
you're talking about the Big Bang Theory.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The Big Bang Theory to me is actually good entertainment, I think, because it makes people laugh and feel good, but it's just not really good storytelling. But it's good entertaining, and we want to talk about it a little bit. I mean, some of you might be more interested in having a story to tell, a message, or real authentic characters to pull your audience into the situation. The Big Bang Theory is not about that. Big Bang Theory is about very light entertainment, and people love that. It's
Hmm.
as long as it was on the air, it was the number one. It was the number one comedy. It might have been the number one show. I'm not sure. It was always way up at the top, and it scored really big, and it made Chuck Lorre, the creator, huge amounts of money. And some of you might be more interested in the money and the entertainment than in the quality of the actual storytelling, and that's okay too. That's some people want to be stand-up comics, and some people want to be dramatic actors. It's a
It's got
whole
a
world
broad
of
appeal. I mean, you
entertainment.
can see why it has, definitely a broad appeal. It's got a lot of sexual innuendo, a lot of sexually driven kind of almost like it has like a frat boy type of humor, although I was never in a frat, so I can't say what their
Well,
humor is
I call
specifically.
it sophomoric humor. It's
Right,
kind of
okay.
like sophomoric college humor is what it feels like to me.
Yeah.
Where Atlanta is is literature as close
Hmm.
literature doesn't usually cover visual media,
Hmm.
but it's a story, and the characters are deep and complex.
Hmm.
The characters in The Big Bang Theory, I consider very one-dimensional, maybe two. They're very simple characters, but were really interesting in the original concept of the guys being not a nuclear scientist, being physicists.
Physicist, yeah.
Physicists, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, that was interesting because I've never seen. Usually, you see the goofy guy next door, the nerd next door, and he's a nerdy guy who has a nerdy job. He works in a comic book store or something. It's like that kind of thing. But the difference in this series was the idea that they are all very, very smart, all geniuses, all the guys.
Hmm.
They still act like nerdy comic book store owners,
Hmm.
but they not that there's anything wrong with being a comic store owner. I
It's just
just
a trope, yeah. I mean, it's like
yeah,
that Revenge of the Nerds gets the hot
yeah,
chick kind of.
yeah. But in this case,
Yeah.
you're actually super smart. And
Hmm.
so in the early seasons, or mainly in the first and part of the second season, they did a lot of references to not nuclear, I keep wanting to say nuclear, to physics and their jargon as physicists,
Hmm.
and they'd work it into their conversations and did it in a clever enough way that it was really interesting. And a lot of people were drawn into it by thinking the show was smarter than it was
Hmm.
because of the references to these very esoteric, really intelligent areas. And then they ran out of that. They just got to the point by the second season where they just that stuff. They ran out of it. They had people who were advisors who gave them all that information, but it just couldn't build jokes on it all the time. And they just eventually went to just the boy wants the girl next door
Hmm.
sitcom.
Yeah, I mean that's the main trope of the show is it's a boy meets girl, and he wants to hook up with the girl, and that's the
Mm,
main premise. And then in the beginning of the pilot, that's the main complication of the story. It's kind of a weird. Generally, like with sitcoms, you have the complication for the episode set up pretty early. I guess they set up the series, or the series complication right at the beginning, and you get that premise. But it's kind of a soft complication. I guess it really isn't, but it is interesting to see how they just kind of threw it in there. They get it going, and then that's the angle of the show from there then on out. It
yeah.
does have kind of a Three's Company type of
Yep.
humor. Not to knock Three's Company, I used to like that show a lot, but just in terms of the depth,
Yeah. No.
comparatively to
No
Atlanta.
depth. Yeah. No important social issues or political issues to discuss. It's
Yeah.
all just about making you laugh and making you uh, pass time quickly.
Hmm.
And as I said, that's valid entertainment. I'm not putting it down at all. But well, maybe that sounded like I was putting it down, but I don't mean to. Um,
Because it's fun. I
it-
mean, those shows are fun, and they're great shows. Like if you are eating dinner or something, you don't want to watch something too heady. You just want to like kind of hang out with the characters and be entertained.
Oh yeah, yeah. You come home from work and you had a hard day and you don't want
Yeah,
to think. You don't want to
yeah.
think. These are non-thinking shows. And again, I don't mean that as a put down, but
Hmm.
it's a type. It doesn't make you troubled. It doesn't make you think, oh yeah, the world has this problem or it has that problem. All you got is a guy who sees a great looking girl and wants her. And that's what the whole thing's about. And I think Three's Company is a good comparison in the tone and style of the show. And what happened is they found out um, that the characters, primarily the characters became really funny, goofy characters like you would in Three's Company,
Hmm.
and worked really well. In particular, the lead who played Sheldon became a breakout character, and that some shows start that way. They have a really funny, unusual character, and that becomes their lead right from the start. And sometimes they're discovering them. I've seen many shows where one person who was a lesser character, they find scores so big they start giving that person more and more until that becomes the face of the show. And that's what happened with this show. It was the story about Sheldon and Leonard's
Hmm.
uh, relationship and Leonard's obsession with Penny, the neighbor next door. But those three people became, and the other characters were all good characters in terms of being entertaining, but it became a show about those kind of goofy characters, frankly. It was kind of goofy.
Hmm.
And but entertaining, and I have to give Chuck Lorre credit for the fact that he comes up with a lot of jokes, lots of jokes.
Very joke heavy
And
show. Like
yeah,
joke, joke,
very
joke, joke, joke. They used
yes,
to say, what is
yes.
it, three on a page or something? This is like
Yep, three
five or
jokes per
six or
page.
something.
Yeah, yeah. And of those jokes, every one out of five is a big joke. Really
Yeah.
scores big. So it's kind of like it's an easy half hour to spend. The half hour is really only 22 minutes because the rest is commercials. And with Chuck Lorre shows, he got to the point where he was only doing about 18 minutes, and nobody was complaining. He was saying, "Fine, we'll put in more commercials." Uh, Chuck Lorre could call his shots because he had so many shows that succeeded of that nature. But all his shows were like that. They were all shows that were real easy to watch because they were never story heavy. They were never character heavy. They were light characters, light situations. They were truly sitcoms,
Hmm.
situation comedies.
Yeah, it's a
Uh,
situation. Yeah, definitely.
yeah. And
Dog's
yeah.
going crazy.
Oh, that's not one of the roosters.
No.
I'm a city boy, so I don't know.
Hold on one second. It's probably getting some kind of delivery. He doesn't really understand, like when we're recording, he's got to keep it quiet or whatever.
Did you put us on pause?
No, but let me, I'll just,
Oh, no, that's okay. We'll just talk through it. I don't
okay.
care.
Yeah. That's my laugh track. I have a unique laugh track.
Yeah, I was say anybody listening to this show care about the barking dog? No? Okay, good. I
Yeah.
will just go on then.
I was
So
going to say, though, is the genius of this combination of having geniuses, literally, and then like not only the lowbrow humor, but the boy meets girl,
Mhm.
trope, that premise. So that's actually pretty smart because even though we were saying like it's a light comedy, it's not got a lot of really in-depth, problematic type of characters, story arcs. It does have the idea of being intelligent. You know what I mean? It's
Yes, and
so.
that was new. I don't think I've seen that before, where all your characters, except for Penny, all the characters were extremely smart geniuses. They were all
Mhm.
geniuses, and I think that again, I give Chuck Lorre credit for saying, okay, I'm just going to do an old fashioned sitcom here, but make I'm going to give it a twist by making all the nerds next door super intelligent genius nerds,
Mhm.
and I've never seen that before, and I think that was what made it and that's what got attention early on, and then people would watch it and see, whoa, Penny's a knockout,
Mhm.
and the jokes are funny, and then it got to the point where they didn't have to do the science stuff so much because they ran out of that. It's just hard to keep up doing jokes about string theory in physics. It's like, how many jokes can you do? There are
And how
only
many
10.
people can relate? There's not a
Yeah,
tons of people who are going to be able to like, oh yeah, that's really funny, because
yeah. But they found a way in the early seasons to make that stuff funny.
yeah.
But it was hard because it was always kind of in something where the subtext told you what the string theory didn't really matter. What mattered was they were talking about string theory in a situation where it confused Penny or whatever.
Hmm.
But whatever, it was a successful show. And so one of the things I wanted to do is put up the scripts from, we didn't actually, let's talk a little bit more about Atlanta though. We've been
Okay.
talking about the Big
We
Bang
talked
Theory.
about it last episode, but you wanted to
Oh, I
let's
didn't know we talked about it last episode.
we talked about it last episode, but I think we didn't do the deep dive. Like, and we talked about the characters, the story, the arcs, what we liked, what we did, but we didn't show the thing that you want to show, which is the
Oh,
script and the
okay. Well, no,
comparison and stuff like that.
well, if they've already seen that, then we don't have to talk about all that. Also, sometimes I forget. Like I forgot that the episode where we told them how to be happy for the rest of their lives.
Hmm.
I don't remember when we recorded that. I know we did that, but
Yeah,
so I
it's
guess you have to
definitely.
watch all the episodes to find the one where we tell you that.
Or check the clip show when we have that stuff ready. But I think we didn't do what I think would be great though is that idea you have where we show them the comparison between the two scripts. We didn't do any of that physical stuff, like
All
show them the
right, let's
actual
do that.
tactile information. Yeah.
So coincidentally, I have both scripts here ready to put up on the screen.
Wow, that's
So
amazing.
isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So I'm going to put up Atlanta first.
Perfect
Here's
timing.
Atlanta. All right, that's just a title page. And now I'm going to put up The Big Bang Theory. Here we go.
I think you have to share your screen real quick.
Oh, nobody sees it yet.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to share my screen. Well, that's interesting because I have to take the one off to get to the thing where I can pull up. Excuse me for this. I'm
This
not
is
real.
something new we're trying so that way we
Yeah,
can.
this is something I'm not real good at sharing. Here we go. So now I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to do desktop. I'm going to share desktop. So here, let me do desktop 1. Okay, that should come up. Can you see what's on my desktop yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. Not yet. Now you got share.
Now I got it.
Now you can. And now here comes with Big Bang Theory. Now do you see that?
Yeah.
And do you see that?
Yeah.
See, nothing up my sleeves. It's just okay. So here they are. So obviously, you guys know I was very successful in the business. So now you don't have to know anything about the technical aspects, and you can still be a very successful half-hour comedy producer, writer, whatever, because you don't have to know any of this stuff. I'm really bad with technical aspects. So here we go. But okay, I got this. All right, so here's Atlanta. So Atlanta's on the left, on my left. So you've seen it. It says Atlanta. It shows you it was written by.
Yeah.
You probably knew that because he's got a lot of publicity for that. He's also the star of it. Donald's also the star of the show, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Let's look on the Big Bang Theory. It's a revised pilot. Oh, by the way, yeah, because the original pilot was actually written for a different actress, which is a really interesting story. It was written for an actress who was more kind of a ball buster actress. You know, she just gave him a hard time. She's really a tough, strong woman. And when they tested it, it didn't test real well. So they went back and said, well, if it's boy meets girl, and this is like nerd is attracted to this woman, who nerds, will be understood better being attracted to a woman who's really a hot looking
Mm-hmm.
person who, and you put it well when we were talking about it earlier, that both these guys are like beta males,
Mm-hmm.
and the original one was an alpha woman. She was really strong, and I think that was a more challenging. That would have been a more challenging series.
Mm-hmm.
This guy who's a beta male wins over this alpha woman, which maybe it's not possible. I don't know, but it would be really challenging me. I'd be more interested in tackling that one as a writer and as a viewer. But what they did is they said, okay, look, it didn't test that well. Let's go back and let's make her even less than a beta female.
Right, and Wallowitz is the one. He's the one that called him. He said that he's the alpha male of the group. Later on in the pilot. So
Um,
he's the one that kind of pegged them as being more of the beta males, and the complication with this. I don't know if it's spoiler alert. We're going to talk about all this stuff. So the complication with the story, which is really doesn't show up until the very end of Act One, kind of like Act One, Act Two ish. Then they actually have to confront an actual alpha male. So you get to see that
yeah.
difference right there, and that's what leads to the resolution of the story. So kind of an interesting thing about this, when I was talking about the complication earlier, generally you have the complication, and then in a lot of screenplays the person accomplishes whatever goal was set out on page 1 through 5 or whatever, the object of the episode. They'll usually accomplish that goal, I guess, because in this sense the goal is to get closer to Penny. That particular thing supersedes the actual complication of the story, which is to go and
Yes.
retrieve, the TV, which we'll get to later. But in the script, it actually says close, so it's a little bit different.
Yeah. So anyhow, so you see here, so it's a revised pilot because they went back and said, okay, well, we're going to change. We're going to get rid of she was actually quite good. They were going to get rid of the actress who was a strong woman,
Mm-hmm.
and then go with which, for women's sake, this is like like rubbing salt into a wound. They're going to go with this woman who's less than a beta woman. It's
Mm-hmm.
just really a pushover, kind of. I'd say not kind of. She's really very soft character. She wants to be an actress. The character wants to be an actress, and it's all the typical stuff. They went
very classical, right? Like she's beautiful. Yeah. She's approachable. She's not like
it's approachable, the big
or anything.
Thing. Yeah.
Very. She has even the shape of her face and everything in terms of like, the deep psychological aspect of like people liking rounder things. Being like seals or VW bugs or whatever.
Round
babies.
But she has kind of a roundish face with big eyes and very pretty and a beautiful look. A really great figure, really nice body and really
blonde,
nice
I guess,
blonde.
So
yeah, they went for everything.
Yeah.
Even made her blonde, blue-eyed. It's just like, wow. They just went for. So somebody said, okay, let's make these guys geniuses. Let's make them fine for the girl next door. But she's not the girl next door. She's a strong woman next door. And somebody said, wow, that's really interesting series.
Yeah, let's go. Yeah, let's do something new, All right.
Yeah. And then they test it and it doesn't test through the roof. And then Chuck Lorre says, well, I think I have a better idea. Let's just make her the typical blonde bombshell and nerds. And let's make it about that. And so
that's actually a good point, you bring up, because a lot of people think it's the creators of the show, or nobody ever thinks about the writers, but they'll blame the writers. They'll come up with reasons, and it's toxic masculinity as to why these things end up on the air. But they test this stuff with different test audiences first, and it's not always made up of just men who are like fresh out of college or whatever. So there's a reason why these things get on the air, and a lot of people forget that like there are women who want to see these type of, because it's a fantasy type of reality. You know what I mean? It's not a real circumstance. So
Yes, it is a fantasy, and the truth is that they tested it with real people, and the real people said, "We don't want that more difficult story. We want the simple
I would
story."
like to see what the notes were. Like she was whiny or confrontational, or you know what
She
I
was
mean?
she wasn't whiny. She was confrontational. She was a strong woman,
Yeah.
and they didn't want a strong woman. They felt the strong woman made these guys look too docile
Hmm.
and weak, and they wanted these guys to be able to have an approachable woman next door. And whatever, Chuck came in and said, "Look, I've been making tons of money and had huge success with my sitcoms. I'll tell you what will work." And then he got their attention by coming up with something that sounded different and really cool and challenging. And then once they tested, he could say, "Well, here's how we're going to do it. We're going back to
Yeah, I
what
wonder if that's one of
works."
those things where they pitch it first with this particular model. I don't mean model, but like Penny character, and then they get pushback from the network. Oh, that's not really what we want, and then they test it, and then he's like, "See, I just, maybe we can go back to this." Or I wonder like what the build up to that was. That's interesting. I think. Yeah, and it went on
Yeah,
for
yeah.
years. That model works. It's not like
Oh, it
it's a
works.
slap
That
in the
model
face
has
to
worked.
people, feminists or whatever. I'm not trying to get political, but there
No,
is a
I
lot of
know.
talk about that where it's like they make it seem like, here's the interesting thing. Atlanta is a great show. It's very heady. It's got very attractive people, but it has a lot of depth. Nowhere near as big as Big Bang Theory. That could be the channel it's on, the time of, the era we're in, what have you.
You're
But
never as successful financially or in numbers of people watching.
sure.
Yes.
And there's shows like Friends, like that people say, oh, Friends wasn't that complicated, or, but those shows serve a real purpose in our collective psyche, right? So you don't have to. And I think sometimes people don't like to admit they like these shows. Like I like the show. I think it's good. It's not something that I watch all the time. I'm
Big
not
Bang Theory. You're
right.
talking
I'm
about
not
Big Bang
super
Theory. Yeah.
familiar with it. I had to go back and be reminded, but it's just not my
Yeah.
type of thing that I view all the time, but I appreciate what it is. And I definitely appreciate, and it seems like it's simplistic, right? But it's actually very difficult to do this, even. It's very hard to make this type of comedy and appeal to a broad audience. That's a
It
very
is.
difficult thing to do.
This kind of comedy, The Big Bang Theory, requires lots of jokes and every once in a while a really big joke, but
Hmm.
lots of jokes. And Atlanta doesn't require jokes. Atlanta's about the story. So Atlanta has some humor to it, some good humor, but
Hmm.
never a laugh out loud moment in Atlanta, at least in my reaction to it. But to me, I prefer Atlanta. I prefer the strength of the story and the characters,
Hmm.
but that's why we say they're two different types, and they're in the same category. And the more, I hope we're not going to show, we're going to show you clips, but I also hope you'll watch them because they're both very successful in their own areas, but both are considered half-hour comedies and competed against each other for Emmys and such, which seems silly to me because they don't seem like the same kind of genre, and yet they stick them in the same genre of half-hour comedy or sitcom. And Big Bang Theory is definitely that. And Atlanta is not that. Atlanta is something else. But I believe Atlanta won for Best Comedy, but it got nominated every year. And Big
Hmm.
Bang Theory never gets nominated for Best Comedy.
I
Never
will
did.
say too, like even though I mean your take is that it wasn't laugh out loud. I actually found some laugh out loud moments in Atlanta.
Mm,
Sometimes, like I said, I went ahead and after watching the pilot, I was so interested in the show, I continued and kept watching
yeah.
different episodes, and I found some laugh out loud moments in Big Bang Theory too. So, but
Yeah.
they're
Well,
totally
a lot of
different.
them, laugh out loud moments in Big Bang Theory, you find the first episode immediately in the first 2 minutes.
Right, right.
Atlanta,
But
you
here's the
have to
thing.
watch. Yeah.
Oh no, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just excited about saying the thing about the laugh track, which is like,
No, go ahead.
there's jokes that I'm like, that's not funny.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
audience is like, this is the funniest thing I've ever heard, and I'm like, what are we watching, that's so different? I don't, so
Sometimes the laugh tracks cheat,
yeah.
and most shows they cheat. So I don't like that. But I was saying I am fascinated by Atlanta, not fascinated by the Big Bang Theory, but found both of them entertaining. I could watch them both.
Yeah. And that's the other thing with Atlanta, right? The Big Bang Theory cues you in to laugh at certain things because they have a laugh track. So it's corralling the audience into, this is the punchline, this is this is the punchline, here's the setup, so you're being like guided along in a different way, whereas Atlanta is single camera, no laugh track, nothing like that. It's got more of a, it doesn't have the bright, like ridiculous lighting and colors, kind of clownish colors, that that classic comedy setup that you have for TV, that sitcom setup. So it's got more like the hues are different. It's just the lighting's different. It's more like gritty. It's more of like like a real like you'd see with like a short film, or not a short film,
Well,
but like a film. The look
yeah,
is
more like a
different.
short film, the episodes, but the
Yeah.
overall arc of the series is like a very long film because it covers more ground than a film could cover.
Right.
But what I want to show you here is the difference in the two script styles because they're very different. The formatting of the two scripts are very different, and you'll see the Big Bang Theory is also written like it appears. It's a simpler format. The Atlanta you'll see looks like a short film. You'll see that the script looks like a short film script. Big Bang Theory looks like a half-hour sitcom, multiple camera show. And so I'm going to show these to you now to show why that's different. Here's Atlanta. I'm going to go with Atlanta first. I'm just going to scroll through this. We're not going to read it. I just want you to see the formatting. Now, see the formatting looks. Those of you who are here probably have written or seen screenplays. So here's one. It looks like a screenplay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Here's the
single camera. It's got your regular exterior, interior. Not like that's different, but you'll see like with Big Bang Theory, a lot of that stuff is underlined, and the dialogue is single spaced.
Yeah, I'm going to show it to you in a minute. First, I want to say this was created by Chuck Lorre and Bill Prady. I don't know Bill Prady.
Is it Bill Prady or Prady? Probably Prady.
I don't know. But anyhow, Chuck Lorre does that. He gets other people. I don't know if they come in with the original idea and then Chuck makes it more commercial or makes it more successful or what. He seems to do partners a lot. He has all these shows and he seems to have somebody else. I think other people come in with an idea. Like maybe Bill came in with the idea about the physicist or whatever, and then Chuck said, "Oh, look, hey, let's make this funnier or whatever." I don't know that, but I'm just showing it's interesting. It was created by Chuck Lorre, who's huge name. Everybody knows Chuck Lorre's name, and Bill probably does too. I probably should know his name, but Bill's not as successful as Chuck, except for in this series. But it seems like Chuck has a different partner in each of his very successful series. All right, now look, here's the script. Here's page 1. You can already see there's a big difference. See how, for one thing, all the action lines, all the descriptions are in uppercase. Now, there's no good reason for that. I don't see why. It's traditional, and that's the way it's done. If you write a half-hour comedy that's multiple camera, you don't do this. They'll do it for you. I once did that I was running Cheers. I was the showrunner on Cheers, and I actually wrote a script like this, like a Big Bang Theory. I mean, like a Atlanta in form, because it's fewer pages of paper.
Right.
And I really wanted to save paper. I mean, I went through this period where I thought, well, it's the same content. You have the same dialogue, the same action, everything's the same, except when you write it in screenplay format, it takes up much less room. See all this double spacing in the dialogue?
Yeah.
So I wrote one like this. And when we went to the table, it looked like this. I mean, who did that? Somebody took my script, and I was a showrunner, and I approved it, and we did all the drafts and everything. And we had the one that was supposed to go to the table all ready to go. And we sent it out to go to the table. But when we got to the table read, which is the first read, and some of you don't know what the table is. The table reading is the first read of the script by the whole staff. Everybody, the whole staff and crew, and everybody's there, and the network, and everybody's there to hear it read by the actors. It looked like this. They changed it. Somebody changed it. Said, "Oh, Ken must have been on something." Well, he wrote it like this. He must have been working on one of his screenplays, and he got carried away. They said, "Well, we'll fix it for him." So it came out like this, which is almost twice as many pages. And I said, "Didn't you see? I was trying to save." I think I even had a cover note that said, "I'm trying to save trees." And they said, "Fuck the trees, this is how we do it, man." I don't care if you're a showrunner or who you are. This is how we do it. So I'm saying this whole thing about it being uppercase, I don't see why that's any better than this, where it's upper and lowercase. Maybe it's easier to read. They figure that people who do comedies, multiple camera comedies, aren't smart enough to be able to read easily, so they try to make the reading as easy as possible. It looks that way. You capitalize all the uppercase for all the stage directions and action lines, and then you double space all the dialogue. See how the dialogue's all double spaced? Look here, it's all single spaced. And they're saying, well, why would you do that? I'm not sure why. Maybe you could write notes in between the lines. If you're the actor or the director or somebody, you can write notes here. And here you have to write the notes on the side, but it's just as easy to write the notes on the side. So I swear these people just want to kill trees. I don't get it. I don't get it. This was the way somebody wrote it so many years ago, and they never changed it. And I came along and I figured, well, I'm running Cheers, the hottest show on television, the hottest comedy. I'm going to change things. I'm going to have us go to single spacing and single camera formatting, and I'm going to save trees. Well, I didn't get past the first script.
It's interesting too, is even though it's 52 pages with the double spacing, it moves faster. Like it actually reads more like you would want with a comedy, whereas like I think the 36 page Atlanta, it feels more dense. Because that spacing, it, in a weird way, slows down the read.
I think it does. So there's probably a psychological advantage to the double spacing for a comedy, but I still would rather save trees.
You also notice too, like with the single space, you have more stage direction. It's more like a film, he has got more stage direction in between. It breaks up the dialogue.
Look at all the stage directions in here. See all the stage directions? I'm moving the script. Yeah. Look at this one. Watch. You'll see there's none. Nothing. It's all dialogue. It's all dialogue. Dialogue. Nobody didn't bother. Here's one stage direction.
And they usually just say crosses to, or like, exits or something. It's very sparse stage direction, whereas, these tend to be, paper rustles, zippers yelp. We can hear the dean starting to pack up his thing. These are like, very dense. I mean, I guess if it's necessary, they do it. I was going to say one more thing too.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you go back to the top,
go back to the first page.
Right there where it says fade in. So on Atlanta, they don't do fade in, which is I've had this discussion. I had this discussion with Keats. He was like so like astonished that we didn't do fade in as much anymore. That was like more of the traditional way to do it. But also with the double space one, the multi-camera, it's more like a play where you put the characters who are going to be in that scene up front, but in the single space one, the single camera one, you don't do that. You just discover the characters as you move through the story, which is kind of fascinating. But actually, as a reader, one of the things you notice is people will just pop a character into the scene without any, like, all of a sudden they have dialogue and they don't have any screen direction, so you're just like, well, where'd this character just come from? All of a sudden this person's speaking and they don't have any introduction onto the page, and it's kind of jarring. That happens a lot.
Yeah. So you can see there's some basic differences in the format, which are consistent with the style of the shows. They seem to be, there's consistency to the density and thoughtfulness in the single camera, and the light, happy, airy script look of the multi-camera. It looks easier to read. You'd probably look at that and say, that's easier to read than this one. This one looks like it's serious reading, and it is. So,
what my wife is always like thinking, because I talk about like, I write a lot or whatever, and she's like, yeah, but she thinks it's funny that I consider that that I write a lot because I'm writing screenplays, and she sees the sparseness of the page as not being like you're not doing that much writing, you don't do that much work because there's not that much on the page. It's like,
I've actually had people ask me how much of the script I have to write and how much, how much do you have to fill in?
Yeah.
Thinking that somehow the actors are ad-libbing and making this stuff up as they go along. I've actually had people say that and say, well, how much do you have to write?
Right.
I explained, we write the whole thing. They rarely ad lib, and on the shows I worked on, they never ad libbed. If they had another way to go, they could bring it up to the writing staff, the showrunner, and say, could I do it this way? And then but I have seen on other shows where they improvise more, some less, but it's all written. It's
Hmm.
all written. Nobody's making this stuff up as they go, and even reality shows are written more sparsely, but they are also written to a large extent, and people don't realize that either. It's kind of like pro wrestling. I hope I'm not spoiling this for those people who are pro wrestlers, but they have an agenda. They have a scenario, a story arc for the whole season of wrestling. They know who's going to win and how and where and who's going to go through what situations. It's all entertainment that's created and performed,
Hmm.
and that's what these are like. That's what like these half-hour comedies. I mean, that's what reality shows are like. I meant to say, the reality shows are scripted and planned out, but they're largely improvised between the script parts. Television half-hour comedies are not improvised; they're written. That I just want to make that clear. We do not
Okay.
have people out there improvising these. It's easier to improvise something like throwing somebody over the ropes into the audience than it is to improvise a very funny comeback to a line that somebody else said. So it takes a long time to write these scripts. And though they don't look like much. It's true. Look at this. Doesn't look like much. You say, wow, this should be easy to write.
Can we
Not
go back to this part too? Because I want to talk about the description. So like when you know how you usually are, one of the rules is don't write something that you can't see on the page. And here's a
right.
perfect example of it's breaking that rule right from the get-go because it says we open on Leonard, a postdoctoral theoretical physicist, an actual genius. His IQ is off the charts. Like how are you supposed to
Absolutely
actually
wrong.
see
Absolutely
that?
wrong.
You
You
can't
should
see
not
that.
write that. You should write that in the description when you're listing the characters if you
Yeah.
want the person who's going to read it to understand. But when you put it in there, there's no way to see that. So absolutely, if you've studied anything about screenwriting, that's the first rule is broken immediately. And I have to say this about Chuck Lorre's writing of these things. He doesn't care about the rules. He just writes them down. And so this rule that says you should not give information that cannot be seen and shown to the audience, he doesn't care.
What's weird is because he just doesn't care about the rules, it automatically sets up who the character is. Usually, like you said, you'd learn this kind of stuff through exposition from character dialogue happening back and
Right,
forth,
right,
or,
right.
rarely would somebody give you like a monologue to where they would explain themselves, but in this case, here he just cuts right to the chase and has that information with him. And then also his friend and roommate Sheldon, also says a verifiable genius with similar credentials, emerges
Yeah.
through a door.
With similar credentials. I mean, the
Yeah,
guy carrying his credentials. I mean, it's
yeah.
like that is absolutely screenwriting 101. They say, do not write stuff that you can't show or see. That's not what stage directions and descriptions and action lines are for.
Hmm.
If you want to tell about your characters, that's about things you cannot see but will develop. You put that in the character description when you're listing the characters, not when you're doing your actual writing. But that's just the way it's taught. Any screenwriting class will tell you that. But Chuck Lorre never took a screenwriting class. Chuck Lorre was a musician who wanted to be a musician first. He wanted to be a rock star.
I wonder if
And
there's something to be learned from that, because if you compare it, and it's not like a one size fits all, because clearly this will work, but that could work maybe because Chuck Lorre's name's on the show, and they already have like they know they're gonna maybe go to pilot with it or something. But if you compare it to Atlanta, where he says we're close on Ernest Marx's face, he looks tired and stressed. His face is tight. His eyes are glassy with exhaustion, probably. He looks struck by something. That feeling of this is happening to me that people get when something unimaginable happens, good or bad. He looks down as the dean speaks. We don't know anything about, like, we can't really, those
yeah,
physical descriptions don't tell us much of, like, Chuck Lorre's might be incorrect, but it tells us a lot about the character right from the first line.
But it tells us as a reader, it doesn't tell your audience. So it's
Sure.
useless. It's really
Right.
useless stuff there because it tells your reader. It's for your reader, not for your audience, where everything on Atlanta is for the audience.
Right.
And so I don't like what Chuck Lorre does. And I think he could have put all that stuff in the character descriptions. But here's what I'm saying. Chuck is not trained. He didn't probably take any screenwriting classes. Chuck just was a funny guy who had an instinct and could tell stories, and he just started putting it down on paper. And maybe the good thing about that is that maybe some of you say, well, that's how I want to do it. And
Mm-hmm.
he is very successful. So I've heard that oh gosh, what's the screenwriter who the director screenwriter very Tarantino does that.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's going to direct it. He doesn't care about the rules. He just puts down what he knows because he's going to direct it as well. So he doesn't know all the rules either. So some people know the rules, some people don't. Here's what I'm telling you as advice. If you're trying to get in, don't do it Chuck Lorre's way because see, readers read your stuff, not that Chuck Lorre won't read your spec script. Who will read your speculative script is some reader who's
Mm-hmm.
going to say, well, this guy didn't even study this stuff because he had no idea how to write action lines and storylines and descriptions. So I'm reading it with his already thinking this guy's an amateur, and I'm just not going to give it serious consideration. I may not even read the whole thing. I may skip through it and just write coverage on it.
Mm-hmm.
So don't do this when you're trying to break in. If you're Chuck Lorre and you got in running, you were running from the get-go and you're Chuck Lorre, yeah, do it any way you want. But when you're trying to break in, do it this way. Do it the way you're taught, because the first people you will contact are the readers and the development people, and they know the rules. And they want you to know the rules to prove that you've studied this stuff, that you're serious about it, that you're not just some guy who's throwing it out there. Chuck Lorre's like an exception to the rule. Chuck Lorre Chuck Lorre's a genius in his own way. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Chuck Lorre's, but there is a genius to his storytelling. So,
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, like, had I not been more on the writing side, had that would that have jumped out to me? Like that's something
I bet most people wouldn't even notice that.
Yeah.
You brought it up. I'm glad you did because that's a good point to bring up because I think it's important for people who are going to send in speculative scripts, to try and get jobs, to try and get on shows, to do it the way the rules tell you to do it. I'm not talking about the rules of your storytelling. The storytelling, be imaginative. You can break rules, some rules.
Right.
But like the basic rules, the basic formatting, do it the way they say is correct when you're trying to break in, because you don't want that as a handicap to get in the way of your story and your storytelling. You don't want somebody to come in already thinking, oh, this guy doesn't have a command of the language. He doesn't have a command of the form.
And they could have done it too. Like when it says we open on Leonard, if they took out that postdoctoral theoretical physicist, actual genius, his IQ is off the charts, and just cuts to he sits impatiently for a beat, picks up a Rubik's Cube, does it, solves it quickly, and then his roommate comes in. So we would already know, like, oh, okay, this guy has it's not an IQ thing, but he's, there's an intelligence associated with solving a Rubik's Cube.
Right, absolutely. And you'll see from the scene when you watch the episode, which I hope you watch the pilot or both, just to.
And I could cue that up too. I have that intro where they walk in.
Yeah, because we'll look at that in a minute. Because you'll see, that was a good point too. All the stuff that Chuck Lorre felt he had to throw in there, again, is not disciplined because it didn't need to be told. The Rubik's Cube tells it all. Tells you the guys are very smart. And as this thing develops, part of the thing about they're donating sperm because they're geniuses comes out also in the dialogue and the action. So Chuck didn't have to do this. This is a sign of lack of discipline, lack of study. Chuck didn't study the form. He's not disciplined about that. He only cares about entertaining, and he does it really well.
I wonder if there's a reason though that he did do that. Like, I wonder if he knows that is a rule, but decided to break that rule just to like supersede or jump ahead. I'm wondering if that's something that he overlooked, or if that's something he did purposefully.
I have to say I don't know Chuck Lorre, but I've met him, and just in the little time I've spent with him, My guess is he just didn't. He just doesn't care.
Mm.
You know, he's Chuck Lorre. He doesn't care what the form looks like, and this is probably just how it occurred to him. I don't think he did it deliberately. I don't think he gave it any thought, to tell you the truth.
Because we don't actually know who drafted this, whether it was Bill Prady or Chuck Lorre. But I
That's
will say
true.
this too. Even though he did break that rule, and that it's just usually that's considered like a novelization of the writing process, right? Like it's something you would put in novels. You
Right.
do
You
those inner
absolutely.
thoughts, that kind of like inner identification.
Uh-huh.
And the reason you wouldn't do that in the say like Atlanta or whatever, he's following the more traditional framework is it's a discovery on the page. So like you said, it's the reader he's writing it for a reading audience, and
Yes.
it's a very interesting distinction, and it's not just the formatting. It's actually like there's, little tricks of the trade that you're seeing that are happening here. And you don't know who
Yeah.
Ernest Marx is at all. This is a discovery piece on the Atlanta side. So you're going to have to like read more to find out more about him.
Yes, and this is a case the writers of Atlanta want you to discover about Ernest the same way the audience does.
Mm-hmm.
They're not giving
Mm-hmm.
you any advantage being the reader. They want you to discover so you get exactly how it's going to look on the screen. So you get exactly how the presentation of the story is.
Right.
Chuck is violating it. Chuck's is an undisciplined form. I'm sorry. Chuck's very successful and could give me a job tomorrow, and I'd be very grateful.
Right.
But and he's hugely successful. But it's not really the best way to write it. The best way to write it is to tell your story the way it's going to be seen, because this is a visual form. This is not a novel. This is visual. So describe in the visual scenes to your reader as it'll play out, so that the reader understands how it's going to look on the screen. With Chuck, he says, you just got to trust me. I'm Chuck Lorre. You know it's going to play out.
One of the things they both don't do, which I think is good, is they're describing things that have to do with the moment they're in, or the attitude, or the environment they're in, but they don't get like super into. And I saw this a lot with newer writers. So at this stage, they filtered all this stuff out, but newer writers tend to say like Ernest Marx is wearing, and unless it's relevant, right? But they'll talk about his clothes, what kind of
Oh
hair he
yeah, yeah.
has, all this kind of stuff. That's decided later by people who are in the wardrobe. That's not stuff that's necessary. Like if you say like, hey, this guy's even if the rules aside, postdoctoral theoretical physicist. Okay, so a wardrobe person is going to have an idea based on how they want to present the show of what kind of clothing this person is going to be wearing. So
Right.
they'll set that stuff up.
But by the way, the wardrobe person will set that stuff up, but then has to go to the showrunner, who's a writer, to get approval.
Sure.
The writer still controls the entire show. The showrunner is a writer, and he controls the show. And when this wardrobe person comes to that showrunner, the showrunner writer ultimately will decide. And so if that would throw him off, like maybe they had him wearing a bow tie,
Mm-hmm.
and because they think that's nerdy, and the showrunner would say, no, that's not at
Right.
all what I had in mind. So forget that. It's too much of a character description, a bow tie, and I didn't have that in there. I would have put it in there. That's why I say, if Ernest Marx had been wearing a bow tie, that would have been important about his character. I would put that in, because who wears a bow tie anymore? It tells you something about the character, if the character is in fact wearing one. So like you were saying, unless the description of the character's look, like the color of their hair or their eyes, or even their race. They didn't say what his race is here. And
Right. Good point.
we
Yes.
know he's black because we know who the character is, and we know who the
I love
actor
that
is.
actually. And they didn't do the typical, they didn't do that on either one of them. They didn't do the race, and they didn't do the typical like age number, which is something you're often taught.
Yes. And you know what? The interesting thing about that is, because you're going to cast this. And when you cast it, you're going to look for the person who plays that character best. And so you don't want to nail that character's look and style unless it's important to the character.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like on Taxi, when we were casting for the Louis character, Danny DeVito came in for the part, and the part was written for a normal size, kind of a heavy, actually, Irish guy with an Irish accent.
Like
Who's an older character. Yeah, an older character.
Yeah.
And Danny came in, this this 4'11" guy.
Sounds like the clowns are here to pick you up.
Yeah. Excuse me, that's my ride. I will talk to you
That's
later.
hilarious.
So anyhow,
So you're saying Danny, yeah, was not exactly
Danny
what was
came in was
on the
not at
page.
all what was on the page. So in a way, you don't want to limit yourself by saying this, describing something very specific, unless that's important to your story and your character.
Yeah. And that goes to, we were talking earlier we touched a little bit earlier on the feminist idea of like not pigeonholing or just casting a beautiful woman for the sake of having a beautiful woman. That actually lends itself to the more contemporary idea of how women want to be portrayed. Obviously I'm going to speak for women because I am an expert, but so take what I say, not only the grain of salt. How do you get, what's more than a grain of salt? Like the salt or something?
Yeah, like a block of salt.
Block of salt. So take what I say as a block of salt. But anyway, you're not saying, oh, she's got a great rack and she's 5'7" and she looks great in a mini skirt. That that tends to be like where you start getting pushback from female readers. They don't want to just be sexualized on the page. For the exact same reason we were talking about earlier, you want to have whoever's going to be the best cast, person best cast for the role, have the opportunity to come in and read for the role and not be like, oh, well, she's not blonde, so she can't do this part. You know what I mean? Because like you said earlier too, with the original pilot, they had a different woman. She wasn't blonde. She didn't look like Penny. She looked like more like that one girl from Two Broke Girls or something like that. So I don't know who she looked like, but I was just imagining.
Well, she didn't look like a typical bombshell stereotype sexy woman. She was a more interesting character to me, a stronger woman. But and they went with a woman who's was not a strong character, but became her own. She held her own eventually, and
I actually prefer this. I prefer this style, because I mean, of course, Donald knows he's going to be playing the character, so he probably doesn't need. It's redundant for him to say this.
You're talking about Atlanta now.
Yeah, but they didn't say like, hey, 36-year-old white male. You know what I mean? That they didn't do that on the other side, so it's normalized. And so if it wasn't Donald playing this particular character, whoever reads it's going to envision themselves or some other person. I prefer this because I do think, I don't want to touch on it too much, but it does lend itself to being categorized racially, which is also, and age too. It's an age thing. You may think the person's 36, but somebody who's 46 but looks 24 or whatever, or 24 that looks 38, or whatever. You give the opportunity to the actor to fulfill the role the best. And so, unless it's relevant, like Death of a Salesman or something,
Yeah, and I think that everybody understood that in The Big Bang Theory, they were all going to be young and good looking. I mean, even the nerdy guys are kind of good looking. It's like that's kind of how half-hour comedies were done. So it was understood. And in Atlanta, everybody knew that Donald was going to play the lead. They knew it was going to be about his Black experience in Atlanta, hip hop music. You could have done a white guy doing that, but then it would have changed the story entirely. I mean, a white guy in hip hop is an unusual.
It might actually be good. I wonder, because that would have been like, like here with Penny, she's kind of a fish out of water. That's another trope that's kind of going on in this story where she's a Cheesecake Factory waitress that can hang out with a bunch of power nerds, So you get a white dude like that's like 8 Mile. Eminem he played himself as a character, in Rabbit, I think his name was in 8 Mile, where it is a white dude in a predominantly Black genre, but it's not totally dominated by Black folks, but it is predominantly dominated by Black folks. So yeah, I mean, it could work.
It's thought of more of a Black art form than it is thought of as a white. And so
it could be China Mac, you know what I mean, or Tekashi 6ix9ine or something like that. These are actually real hip hop people. China Mac is a Chinese dude, and then Tekashi 6ix9ine is
and Eminem was one of the biggest. He was huge as white guy. So it would have changed it, but by not saying it, you just make the assumption that he's black by not
Mhm.
saying it. But a white guy could have come in and read it in such an interesting way, and you say, "Wow, this white guy grew up in an environment where he was exposed to hip hop and he loved hip hop." It would change the story, though. It
Mhm.
would change the story, the
Yeah.
way the story plays out. There are elements that clearly tell you somewhere that it comes from the black culture.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's very interesting. I mean, I think again, we were just throwing up the pages, and it's like, look at how much information is just in the. We're only in the first paragraph. I mean, we're not going to go through every single line, but it's just that like there's a lot of information that sparks, um, not only conversation, but sometimes it could spark debate. It could definitely spark choices in wardrobe, choices in casting, choices in tone. All this kind of stuff is really important. So it's not arbitrary what's put on the page, and
Yeah.
all these things they all kind of play into it. It's very
And if
fascinating.
you were writing a novel, you
Right.
would tell right away that Ernest was black and what his inner thoughts were and things like that, because you're telling everything. You're doing all the jobs yourself. But this is television is a team effort. It's like a lot of people are involved in it. So you just put down what needs to be put down. You don't put down
Or you could have
everything.
a character reaction to him. He could have a line or something like that, and the character's like, "Oh, but you're black." You know what I mean? And then that's when you learn, "Oh, he's black." Like I know that.
Hmm.
What was it? The Hunger Games. One of the characters is described as being black, and then there was like a huge uproar that she was actually black in the film. So I don't know, where that was coming from. I don't know a lot about it. I just remember that. So don't
Hmm.
quote me on that.
Oh,
I
I
could
don't
be
remember that. I don't
completely
remember
wrong,
that.
but like Jesus in the Bible, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen Jesus played as black or white, but they don't really
No.
say.
Yeah. So this is probably taken verbatim from one of those chapters in the Bible, which is
Yeah,
always good too.
I think that's what the Big Bang Theory was based on. These characters, it's all subtext and metaphors we just don't get. So.
Yeah, because John the Baptist, I know for a fact, was wicked good with the Rubik's Cube. I know that's something that he
Yeah,
hammered down all the time.
right. So here I have a question for you. So you're going to show now. You have control over you're
Yeah, I
controlling
could cue that up.
actual.
All right, so we are back and got this queued up, ready to go. So we're just gonna watch. Um, this is the first scene in the pilot episode. So we'll just watch it and comment and see how they set up the characters, see what kind of jokes they tell, how they
Yeah,
establish themselves.
this is right from the beginning. Nobody knows anything about any of these characters yet.
Yeah, so let's see. I'll go ahead and press play, and we'll take it from
Okay.
there.
So if a photon is directed through a plane with two slits in it and either slit is observed, it will not go through both slits. If it's unobserved, it will. However, if it's observed after it's left the plane but before it hits its target, it will not have gone through both slits.
Agreed. What's your point?
There's no point. I just think it's a good idea for a t-shirt.
Okay, so I mean, it's that's the joke. You were saying that some of the jokes were different from the
they
script.
changed things. They did. It definitely was not in the script.
Yeah, and so like, what do we know so far? Sheldon is kind of obviously not the most stylish dresser, I guess, because clearly by his conversation and everything, he's a little bit more on the cerebral side of things and less on the stylish side of things. Leonard is a little bit more.
both of them. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Leonard's a little bit cooler looking, and I guess
A little bit. Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. So yeah. Anyway, so we hit right with the joke.
Yeah. Start off with the first thing that happens is establishes quickly that they're a little cerebral, and then there's a pretty good joke.
Yeah. And it also gives us our style. We have that multicam. We're on set kind of vibe, So
Yeah.
there was something I was going to say, but maybe I'll think of it here in a little bit. But yeah, okay. So let's just see how the rest of the scene plays out.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Hang on.
1 across is Aegean, 8 down is Nabokov, 26 across is MCM, 14 down is, move your finger, phylum, which makes 14 across Port-au-Prince. See, Papa Doc's capital idea. That's Port-au-Prince. Haiti.
Can I help you?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to say, like, okay, so we had what Sheldon said, in terms of, oh, that's what it was. Okay. Remember we were talking about how on the script they had this elaborate description about being like super brains or whatever. It's nothing you can see
Right.
on the page, I mean,
Right.
on the screen, they wrote it on the page, but it's kind of an unusual character description in terms of the rules.
Right.
Here, right away, just by their dialogue, what they're talking about, it's very punchy, but Sheldon's joke, his ideas of the, what was it, the Oppenheimer split or something like that, like that is what he thinks would make a cool t-shirt, right? So that's a funny
Right.
joke. And then he comes in, Leonard comes in, establishes himself as also being intelligent by talking about the crossword puzzle and just, giving her all the answers, which obviously by the look on her face, ruined her enjoyment of it. But it also establishes him as being an intelligent person.
Yeah.
So that was
And I have to say that I've said before, it's not a cerebral show, but it stars cerebral characters. And as you watch the series, they get further and further away from that. It turns more and more into a sitcom later. In the beginning, it's about how smart they are, which are really unique. I haven't seen this before. These guys are geniuses, and they play a lot with it. And they talk about all these theories of physics and astrophysics and all these things. But if you watch the series, you see later and later on, they've just run out of, it's just too hard to keep up all those jokes that are based on science and math. And so they started dropping those and did more and more relationship jokes. And eventually it just became a sitcom with some smart guys who happen to be physicists.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing too, is, you have the idea of a premise, and then the story expands. So you keep, certain parts of the premise intact, but you can't always lean on that thing. And especially like if you either see like short films or those really heavy premise driven shows to where that's the spark, that's what gets the show going. But eventually they just kind of veer off and like they focus on the interactions of the people, and that becomes faint.
Yeah, because you can't rely on your jokes for the series, as you have to rely on the characters.
Right.
And so at some point they load up all the jokes about the characters being physicists, and then they just run out of those jokes. After a while, those jokes would get boring. After a while, those jokes, they'd run out of those jokes. There are only so many jokes that these people who are not physicists will be able to think up with how little they know about physics and whatever. Right. So it will evolve into just a sitcom. But in the beginning here, it's very different, which is why I think it took off so quickly. It was, it felt different. It felt different.
Sure.
And then later on, it didn't. I don't think the series started where it's in the middle of where the series ended up. It would have started out nearly as hot.
Right. Oh, well, yeah. Because then if, as we'll see later, they establish, Penny's character and everything. If you just kind of start off in the middle of that being like the crux of the show, and it's just a relationship show that you're watching with people from different walks of life, it's a little, obviously it's a different story, this
and
is
you've
like,
seen that before. What you haven't seen are extremely bright physicists speaking their own language,
right,
and making it funny enough for the rest of us who don't understand physics to laugh at. And that was something you couldn't sustain. Even if you wanted to, you couldn't sustain it.
And that's actually the genius of the show, right? Is like you're having geniuses appeal to, I don't want to say a dumbed down audience, but we're not all physicists, right? So how do you make their occupation generalized enough that we can all enjoy it, right?
And that's, as I said, that makes limitations that you just couldn't do it. You wouldn't be able to think of enough jokes and situations where you managed to work all those things into. So the pilots very often on many series give you more than you'll see in this series of the specific characteristics and style of the show. And then later on, they're able to fall into just being another relationship sitcom.
You know, it kind of makes me think like if you took like say like Cheers, right? Everybody can kind of understand the premise of Cheers, like people hanging out at a bar, you know,
Right.
shooting the breeze, right? But then if you had when you introduce Frasier, if you had just started with the show about Frasier, it's a much harder sell, right? Because not everybody's I don't know if he's a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I think he's a psychologist.
Psychologist, I believe.
Right. So, because psychiatrists are the ones that give you prescriptions, right? Psychologists are the ones that help you with your Freudian issues. So, if you know that kind of storyline is a much different beginning if you hadn't already established that with him in the bar, being able to kind of hang out with the everyman, you know what I mean? And his elevated conversation still worked within the context of being a general conversation for most people. So that's kind of fun. That's the fun of this show, I think, too, is they and you know, Penny, obviously, when we get to know Penny, she plays more of the everyman character in terms of, you know, the intellectual hierarchy that we would have to establish between them and us, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, I guess we're all, you know, unless I mean, you're more of a science background than I am. You know, you studied more sciences than I did. So this may be.
Yeah, I took 2 classes.
So, you know, I only took the one. So,
yeah.
Let's go ahead and let's see how the rest of the scene plays out and
All right.
see where it goes from there.
Yes. Is this the high IQ sperm bank?
If you have to ask, maybe you shouldn't be here.
I think this is the place.
So, okay, that's a good joke, right? That was a good, solid joke, and that was in the script, you know. So that was a layover. I won't stop it on every single one of them, but I like that joke. It also establishes the they're smart, but they're not respected type of comedy, you know, like in their own little nook, they respect each other, but no, this gives you the idea that they're kind of power nerds and they're still in that they're intellectually superior, but no one cares, you know, that kind of like you know, people can hold that over them.
Yeah, you know, yeah, it's true. Okay.
And also the audience laughter, that always kind of, it's interesting because you're used to it on these type of shows, you know, as opposed to like a single camera show. But I often wonder, like, you know, do people really find all this stuff funny? You know, like I sometimes wonder, like, what is it that they're really laughing at?
They cheated, but they don't cheat at all. You know, it's like they cheat a bit. That laugh seemed a little heavier than I expected.
Right. Okay.
From my experience on extra sets.
Yeah.
It did deserve a laugh, but that felt like a little heavier laugh than I think it was entitled to. And I've been on the shows enough to see it's so easy to bump up your laughs or to put laughs where there were no laughs. So
okay. So they do pepper that then sometimes.
They do a bit. Some shows are more honest than others. Taxi and Cheers, which are 2 shows I worked on, were very honest. The only time they added jokes and laughter was when we had to reshoot a scene several times in front of the same audience because of mistakes made, and then they weren't laughing the 4th take because they knew the punchlines and everything. Right. Then you'd throw in the laughter, but there was no cheating. I suspect this show has a little bit of a tendency to heighten their jokes, their responses. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So that's you know, you actually have experience with hearing the laughter and then, you know, weaving the story in and out. And they sometimes actors do sometimes have to pause, right? To like, so that way the next line doesn't get stepped on by the laughter, the audience laughter.
Absolutely. They've got to learn how to pause for the laughs. And, you know, it's harder for people in films. I used to have that problem with Woody Allen films that I'd miss some of the lines because it wasn't just Woody, but other characters wouldn't hold as long as those of us who were used to doing television and knew kind of pretty good sense of how long the audience would laugh. Where with the movies, they tend to come back too quickly. They don't want those pauses and they don't want to sit there with nothing happening. So they sometimes will step on their own laughter. The audience is laughing in the theater and you can't hear the next setup or the next line. So.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. And I think that's a portion of their talent that isn't really discussed often is you have to stay in that character, you have to stay in that phrase, but you have to give it a little bit of length so that way,
Uh-huh.
the line goes through, the joke gets the response, but then you continue as if the audience is not there. That's a really fascinating skill set.
It is a skill. That's comic actors, it's one of their skills is knowing how to hold for laughs, how to play the laughs. And like you said, yeah, if a laugh is going on longer than expected, you still got to have that sense of you're either wondering what that character said to you or what's going on, or you're taking it in. You got to do something that's a pause that feels natural for that character, but is really a pause for the laughter.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting. That is
Yeah.
so fascinating. Okay, so let's see what else what they do.
Yeah.
Fill these out.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Oh, take your time. I'll just finish my crossword puzzle. Oh, wait.
Yeah, they got a pretty big laugh right there.
Yeah, a little bigger than I think it should have. But they were funny. They're okay jokes, but a little bit
I don't
more.
think I can do this.
Yeah.
What are you kidding? You're a semi-pro.
No, we are committing genetic fraud. There's no guarantee that our sperm is going to generate high IQ offspring. Think about that. I have a sister with the same basic DNA mix who hostesses at Fuddruckers.
Sheldon, this was your idea. A little extra money to get fractional T1 bandwidth in the apartment?
I know, and I do yearn for faster downloads. But there's some poor woman who's going to pin her hopes on my sperm. What if she winds up with a toddler who doesn't know if he should use an integral or a differential to solve for the area under a curve?
I'm sure she'll still love him.
I wouldn't.
Well, what do you want to do?
I want to leave.
Okay.
What's the protocol for leaving?
I don't know. I've never reneged on a proffer of sperm before.
Let's try just walking out.
Okay.
Bye.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like she couldn't just hear them or whatever, but
Yeah.
so
or
that's
even
the,
that bye and the bye-bye.
right, yeah. So that's essentially the first scene. So let's
I
see.
think it's a good scene, though. It's like I'm not a big fan of the show and never have been, but I do appreciate the good writing. That was solid writing. That was introduce the characters, introduce their characteristics, getting major laughs. The whole place is a very successful opening, I think.
Yeah, so after watching that scene, I mean, I feel like, yeah, like you said, it's solid writing. And they actually threw in some intellectual writing too, and not just for the sake of the writing. Just it sounded like true to character. That's kind of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it did. It did sound true to character. The lines were legitimately funny, and yeah, bravo.
Yeah.
Well done. Well done. If you can say bravo for a sitcom, bravo.
Yeah, and I thought it's fun, it's playful. Like you get a real sense, like for it being the first scene of the pilot, you get kind of a real sense of like their interaction, like how they, not only interact with each other, but interact with people that they're not familiar with. Like it really sets a tone for what maybe they will be like as characters throughout the rest of the series.
Yeah, I think when they were trying to sneak out, and she said goodbye, and they were embarrassed and said goodbye, they laughed. That was not the audience. I don't think was going to laugh that hard at that little bit of getting caught on their way out. But that was the blackout or the button or whatever you called. There are different terms for it. The final laugh in a scene in a sitcom is important. So. And it's their first scene, so they needed a big laugh there. I don't think they got the laugh that they put in there.
Yeah, just from the quick little all right, see that kind of thing where she commented back. Yeah, it wasn't like a huge. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like particularly funny. The proffer of sperm thing was funny. The filling out the crossword puzzle thing, that was pretty funny. I mean, that's the other thing about comedy is different things appeal to different people. So what you see is funny, but yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting.
But I'd say this looks like an intelligent show, not just because they're intelligent, because of the way it was written and the way it played out. And I think everybody was true to character. And I would watch a show based on what I've seen so far. I would watch.
Yeah. Let's check out the scene where he where he meets Penny and see like what we think about that one as well. So
Okay.
yeah, that's the other thing too is a lot of these are character establishing. That's the main thing is like when you're establishing characters, it's very important to do very memorable things to bring in the characters so that way like, oh, these are the main characters, they're here for a reason, they have this and, they add this type of energy to the piece. So let's see what
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a good point. That immediately these are your two lead characters. You didn't
Right.
think the receptionist was going to be an important person in the series.
Right.
She had a lot of funny lines, and she did them well.
Right.
But you knew immediately from the way it was laid out and the way it was performed that what this is going to be about these two guys.
Right. Yeah.
New neighbor?
Evidently.
I like how the elevator shaft is always
Significant
broken in the
improvement
shot.
over the old neighbor.
200-pound transvestite with a skin condition? Yes, she is.
See, I wonder if that would play now because of the sensitivity.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi.
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 I'm gonna invite her over. We'll have a nice meal and chat.
Chat? We don't chat, at least not offline.
Well, it's not difficult. You just listen to what she says, and then you say something appropriate in response.
To what end?
Hi. Again.
Hi.
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 Anyway,
So I don't know.
This is a big drop from the first scene.
Right? Yeah, it does have
Big
like
drop.
a different energy, and again, one thing I like is like he's honest about what he wants, but in a dishonest way. Kind of a little bit of contradictory behavior there. Sheldon doesn't seem to pick up on the subtleties, although not in later scenes, like he kind of does. He doesn't seem to be as oblivious as he appears right here. Yeah, and then they did the rhythmic thing with the hi, bye, that kind of thing.
A little bit of that's plenty for me. But
Yeah,
actually, sometimes those jokes work better as they are played out too long. The first time was kind of funny. The second time was not as funny. The third time was like, oh, here they go again. And so it gets a little funnier again.
yeah.
So it was all right. It's not that it was a bad scene. It's just the first scene was everything seemed right on the mark, and the laugh seemed real. This, they were using the machine a little bit too much.
Yeah, that, and also this is clearly a network show, right? Like this is family friendly dinner time TV show. There's not a lot of meat on the bone in terms of the story, the introductions. It's not, we'll look at Atlanta, right? And that's a completely different type of weight to it. This is not that kind of show. This is a little bit campier. Yeah, and it's fun. It's kind of frivolous. It's not really,
Did I mention before? I don't remember if I did that. Penny was not the first neighbor that they had a different actress to play Penny's part. And I don't think her name was Penny. And they had a woman who could hold her own. They had a woman who was a little sarcastic, a little tough. She was confident and self-assured, and it didn't test as well as they wanted.
Interesting.
And so what they did is they went and said, okay, we're just going to go for the stereotype. We're just going to get the really attractive, great body, blonde girl, and everybody will get it. The other way, that she was a little snarky and all these things, it just wasn't as clear. They went for the broader joke, they went for the more obvious way. And that was a decision. They had to fire the other actress to do this. And I never saw it with the other actress, and I wonder how good she was. But I liked the idea of it better, that if they could find her attractive and eventually have a relationship with her, and she's not the stereotype, next door beauty, I would have liked it better.
Yeah, I wonder because, obviously the character playing Penny, or the character playing Penny. The character Penny is very attractive. She's a beautiful woman. So easy to if you're heterosexual and you like attractive women, this is an easy character to like, right? So yeah, it would be interesting. Maybe the other character was too challenging to them on a ratio of masculinity or something like that. They probably would.
I don't know what the reason was, but the simple reason, the one that seems most obvious, is they went for the old stereotype: two nerdy guys see a knockout girl and want her.
Yeah,
and that's the other one was a woman, not a girl. The other one was a more mature, smarter, more of an unequal footing, and they went for the dumbed down version, but. They're trying to sell tickets to a lot of people. You got to have a lot of people watching when this was still on network at a time when it still really mattered that you had lots of people watching. So they decided, wow, the other girl doesn't get the numbers. The woman doesn't get the numbers. This cute, pretty girl does.
Yeah, and I mean, she's very attractive, but yeah, it could just be something. Phenotypical. It could be something just about the shape of her face or something, nothing about her personality, the snarkiness or not. She's not very snarky. She's a little bit, she plays a little bit ditzy, a little bit clueless,
No, this one's ditzy. This is a ditzy girl. She's sweet, ditzy, and very approachable. The other one wasn't.
Approachable, yeah, that's the thing. Especially for these guys, right? Because they're, Sheldon is somewhat asexual. He seems like, like a Vulcan or something, that type of personality, whereas Leonard's obviously a little bit more aggressive. Actually, that's the other thing about this character establishment, right, is now you see he's an active character, right? That's always super important. You can't have a character that just wants everything to come to them. He's actually going out of his way to establish a relationship, and he does so a little bit like fearlessly, right? Like considering.
I was impressed that they made him not just a scared, nerdy guy. That he took some incentive there. He made a bold move.
Yeah, right off the bat. Yeah, didn't hesitate. Yeah.
So that was interesting. Interesting.
And then, Leonard's a good wingman because he has apparently no interest whatsoever in this girl.
Sheldon.
So Sheldon, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So he doesn't, he doesn't, he's not gonna. There's no competition. They're not both vying for the same girl.
Sheldon doesn't even know what's going on at this point.
Right. Yeah. Which is just hard to.
I
guess that's apparently like he's so intellectual that he just can't imagine that a warm-blooded male would be interested in this girl over here.
It's a little bit of a stretch, but
yeah, it's a lot of a stretch. All right, let's see what else they do here.
We brought home Indian food, and I know that moving can be stressful, and I find that when I'm undergoing stress, that good food and company can have a comforting effect. Also, curry's a natural laxative, and I don't have to tell you that, a clean colon is just one less thing to worry about.
Kind of a weird.
Leonard, I'm no expert here, but I believe in the context of a luncheon invitation, you might want to skip the reference to bowel movements.
That was in the script.
You're inviting me over to eat?
Yes.
That's so nice. I'd love to.
That was her takeaway. That's her takeaway.
What do you guys do for fun around here?
It's so weird how she just walks into his place. I just stepped on the line. That was the big laugh. That was actually a decent laugh, I think.
What was it?
I'll replay that one. She asked him what they do for fun around there, and then.
I'd love to.
Great.
So, what do you guys do for fun around here?
Well, today we tried masturbating for money.
So for network, that's that's a pretty good, that's a pretty heavy raunchy joke, as people say these days, but yeah, I think that's that was kind of funny, and but it fit to the scene, it fit to the scene and also to character.
Yeah, but the weird thing, and this gets really nitpicky.
Sure.
It's only because I'm a writer and I'm looking at every word. But you probably wouldn't say, "What do you guys do around for fun?" Because what they were doing was not for fun. They were doing it for money.
Yeah.
So it didn't really fit. It would be more
Right.
appropriate. So what do you guys do what do you guys do that's interesting around here? Well,
Yeah.
we masturbated for money. They still
Yeah.
got the joke, and it would have been consistent.
Right.
But everybody knew where they were going. They understood the subtext, but they didn't write it as well as it should have been written, because it could have been exactly right and still worked, and the joke would still work.
Yeah.
And I know this is nitpicky. This is only for other writers, because people
Yeah.
who were watching it only got that they got to say in front of this pretty girl that they masturbated this afternoon for
Yeah.
money, or they tried to. So
Yeah.
they got that big laugh out, that awkward, embarrassing laugh,
Hmm.
but they cheated a little bit when they didn't even have to, which is what the weird thing about it.
And it was off the cuff enough to, like, you wouldn't expect him to say that, especially admit that to the new neighbor, So
Right. So I mean, it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay. I'm saying this is nitpicky.
Sure.
This is where writers sit around and say, "Oh, gee,
Yeah.
you just could have done that without cheating it a little bit, and it
Yeah.
still would have worked just fine." So
Yeah, I mean, so what do you think? I mean, we watched the first scene. I can't remember. I think this is probably the second scene. This is after they leave and then they come.
this is the second scene. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I could see why people would watch the show. I wouldn't predict that 9, 12, 15, 100 years later, the show would still be on the air, like, I don't know how many seasons it was, but, based off of that, but what they do establish is they have a good chemistry. The actors have a good chemistry. So
Yeah,
that's
all
not
the
something you could
actors-
prepare for on the page. That's just something you hope for, but.
All the actors are cooking. They're all doing
Yeah.
really well. They're all playing their parts well. And there's certain poetic license, as I said. So a word
Mhm.
that's not quite right, but you did it because it made your setup a little stronger,
Mhm.
is okay. It's the poetic license, and your audience is forgiving it like crazy because they're having a good time.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's if you were writing this type of show, right? Like, if this is the kind of, and we already talked about, like, whether there's a lot of meat on the bone. This is a very thin story. We're not going to go through the whole, pilot and dissect
No,
everything.
we're
We're
not
just
gonna-
going to watch
no,
these
no.
scenes. But in terms of the story arc for that particular episode, it's not very meaty, right? Like, if we talked about Atlanta, and Atlanta's story is much more, not only like just a completely different storytelling style, but also the subject matter is very different, very weighty, and I don't want to say contemporary because it's from any time, but it does deal with a kind of reality that most people are probably not that familiar with. But it's also not a network show.
That's what I'm saying. It's also a different kind of story. This is a story we've seen thousands of times.
Sure. Yeah.
Two guys who are kind of nerdy or not on the top of the game, not at the top of the scale of attractive guys,
Right.
meet an attractive woman who's their neighbor, and they're going gaga over her,
Right.
and she's kind of leading them on unintentionally by being so approachable.
Yeah.
And we've seen that. It's just not a new idea. It's not even done in a new way. But they had solid jokes. They have solid characters, and they have actors who are playing it really well, and the directing's good. And so everything's working for it. It's just not. It's just not that as challenging. But this isn't meant to be challenging. This show is always meant to just be a good time.
Yeah, and I think the challenging, another way to look at that, whether it's challenging or not, is just how accepting. She just closes the door to her apartment, walks right into their apartment, like, leads the way. Like, that behavior to me is so bizarre. I mean, what they're in LA, it's just too trusting, right? Like, of complete strangers. I think, that kind of jars me, maybe too much reality seeping into fantasy.
The joke they did about the unattractive neighbor, I mean, they went for they say transvestite.
Transvestite,
that word.
I don't think that would play now. I think
no, it
that
wouldn't play now because, and you didn't have to do that. All you had to do is say somebody unattractive that isn't somebody who's so downtrodden and has trying to overcome so many difficult things. All you had to do is the guy who liked to, like, smell his own armpits, or there's a lot of things you could have done.
Something behavioral,
right? You didn't have to do somebody. You wouldn't want to do a fat joke. You didn't.
They did a fat joke in the first pilot, like when in the reading of the first pilot, we noticed, like, it was a fat joke, not a transvestite joke, and I was like, oh, they went from that. I don't know what, maybe they tested that wrong, and then this is what they landed on. Yeah, and I was like, wow, this is an era thing for sure, but
also it's it's a certain lack of sensitivity, which we've seen
Sure.
throughout this series.
Yeah.
That they're more concerned with getting jokes than being politically correct or even emotionally or morally correct. This show is just done for the entertainment. It's just done for the laughs, and they don't worry about those things. And some people who are listening are saying, "Well, why should we? We're just tuning in for a good time." Absolutely, you're right. If you're just tuning in for a good time, and it's all right, unless you happen to be a transvestite who found that very offensive, and it wasn't necessary to offend somebody who has enough things to work on, to deal with.
Yeah, and I agree. Like, it could have just been
so.
behavioral, something awkward about the person
Yeah.
that doesn't have to create an adversarial attitude toward a particular group of people, right? Like, so that way you get the joke across, and it could be funny. Actually, that part of it could be funny too, like bizarre behavior or something.
That's why you can always think a
uncomfortable.
little further and fix things. But most people don't bother. It's like slow effort thinking kind of. It's like you got it there, it's done, just move on. But because I've actually worked on shows where I've actually said, well, why does that little girl have to stick the fork? I was on a show, stick a fork into into the electrical outlet and get a shock, and then enjoy it so much she wants to keep doing it. There were a lot of other jokes we could have done. And there were a lot of other punchlines that set up, and somebody the room got furious at me. He said, "What are you doing? This is just for entertainment." I said, "Yeah, but can't we take a little bit of a higher moral ground and have some responsibility for the kinds of jokes we tell?" And they got everybody. I mean, there wasn't one person on my side. They basically kicked me out of the room. And it's probably there's some people watching the show who want to kick me out of the room too right now for this. But
I think now, though, I think that people are so on edge for any type of thing like that.
But my point is, they're
out
almost always, if you have a solid joke based on a misunderstanding or a misspoken word or choice of words, if you just spend a little more time, you can find one that isn't hurtful or offensive. But they don't care. Most of the people doing these shows want to get the laughs and move on, and they don't want to spend the extra time with these other things because they have long days, and they just don't care that much. And maybe I cared too much, and because I did care too much, I made some enemies who would be pissed at me for taking the extra time to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, I get the argument for both sides, right? Like, you do want to have some responsibility, for the viewing audience. You don't want to put them in jeopardy just because you can't account for every person that's watching. And it's also not your responsibility to account for every person. And you don't also want to you don't want to start, creating barriers for the artist to, because if they start second guessing this thing, they could second guess that thing, and the next, they're self-censoring everything, that comes down the pike. So,
I just think you can take I agree, and I think you can go too far with that and hinder yourself. But I think you could take a little extra time to think of a better line that maybe won't hurt anybody.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. I guess I don't remember when this came out, what year. I should probably know that, for this conversation.
Well, it ran for a long time, so I'd say, given what time we're doing this, I'd say it was like 15 years ago.
Early 2000s. It didn't come out before 2000, right?
No, I don't think so. No, it was after that. So,
woke culture has become more prevalent over the last few years. Not that I imagine that people in that group would have felt somewhat offended, maybe quite more quiet, quietly so, like they wouldn't have expressed it so vocally. But yeah, I mean, everybody's going to be offended too. That's the other thing. You're going to find somebody who's going to be offended about something.
One time I had to suffer from some stuff that was misdirected toward me when I wasn't responsible for the mistake, where I wrote a show about a reclusive person, and he was just quirky and reclusive, and it was a little bit of an inconvenience in his life, but it wasn't a mental illness. And the showrunners decided to turn that into agoraphobia, and which is a very serious illness for some people who cannot leave their apartments.
Right. Yeah.
So what ended up happening was they made this story about an agoraphobic, and the story played out the same because this guy gets crushed on Elaine,
Mm-hmm.
and he's just kind of quirky. Was one way, either way, you could say he was quirky. And she wants to. He's a famous artist. She was an art gallery person, so she's really into this, and she wants to visit with him and deal with stuff. And it's awkward that he's either reclusive or he's agoraphobic.
Right.
He didn't have to be agoraphobic to make it work, and I don't think that added anything to it. But here's the part that was hard for me was that I got some letters from people who had that mental problem who were furious with me for doing that, and I didn't do it. It wasn't my choice. That
and that's the thing. It's like, somebody's always going to be offended, and you never know who's viewing. You don't know that agoraphobics, are like tuned in. You have no idea.
Except you would think that it's so easy not to do that. Why do you have to do something that may be hurtful when it's so easy to not be hurtful and still do the same story and the same jokes? And I've never really understood what people do. And some people say, well, they want to do something that hasn't been seen before. We haven't seen agoraphobics on television. And I don't think it's a good argument for it. But again, there are people who say, well, you're not an artist because artists will do anything for the art. You don't. You're thinking about these other things that you have to tone it down. I said, well, I never want to tone it down. I just think that sometimes you can make it just as good and take a moment to think beyond just the simplest thought.
Kind of go a different route. Yeah.
I don't know.
So, I mean, should we check out that Atlanta and try to compare them?
Let's jump to Atlanta, because now I think everybody has a pretty good idea. Most people have probably seen this show anyhow. It was a very popular show as long as it was on the air. But you see, this is a funny, light, all about the entertainment and on a very light scale. And Atlanta is very entertaining, but in a very different way.
So I don't really remember what this clip is. So I guess we'll just kind of, watch it and see what happens.
I remember what it is.
All right. And this is from this is from the pilot episode of Atlanta. So let's see. I'll see what we got here. It may just be a montage of different scenes. Let me see.
I had a weird dream. I was swimming in this pool, but it was like the ocean, and I was swimming through seaweed, but it wasn't seaweed. It's like hands. And I was swimming with this girl, and she was saying if the hands grab you, they pull you down and drown you, so swim above them.
That's deep.
I know. I think it's about society, because like all
Who's the girl?
I don't know.
What she look like?
She was fat. You're with Daddy tonight.
All right, so that's the opening scene of the show or whatever. But so there's a joke. There's a couple of jokes right there. First of all, his dream is unusual, and like his description of the dream is, sets up an unusual sense about him and what he's thinking. And then and in typical fashion, you mention anything about a woman to another woman, that you're dating, and they don't care about any of their information. They just want to know, like, who's the other girl that you're talking about. Yeah. So there was another joke there. And I thought that was, because we were talking about whether the show was laugh out loud funny or whatever. And I think if we had a studio audience, that would have gotten a couple of laughs, like whether well-deserved or not, I don't know. But, that's.
I think when she cut him off and said what she looked like.
Yeah.
I think that would have gotten a pretty big laugh, but none of these laughs would be comparable to the laughs we just saw on. And
then he corrected by saying, "Oh, she was fat." Like, don't you know what I mean? Like, let's go back to the dream. Like, let's not focus on the girl.
And that's humorous too. But they're humorous. That one, especially if you put the laugh machine on it, I think you could believe that it got a bigger laugh. So
right.
But these clearly are not the kind of jokes that we just saw.
Yeah. So I guess, this is like a montage of scenes now that I remember this clip. So this will just be different sections. We're not going to see that whole first scene to establish the characters. So it'll be a little bit of a different analysis in that regard. But this is from the pilot. So
another reason for that is when you're shooting a single camera show that looks like a film, you shoot single camera and you shoot lots of scenes. When you shoot the other, like the Big Bang Theory, is a multiple camera. You have many cameras on one set
Mhm.
with a live audience, so you have to have all your stuff talked out. You can't go other places. It's too hard to set up and shoot it, and you can't take your audience with you.
Mhm.
So you see, that's a big difference in the style right from the get go. Is that this is shot like a film.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
they're very short scenes, and they go from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And the Big Bang Theory had just a couple big scenes.
Yeah. And then what were you saying? It was mainly 2 acts, right? The Big Bang Theory, pretty much. It's just much longer acts.
Multiple cameras shot in 2 acts,
Mhm.
and single camera is usually shot in 4 acts, which is kind of weird because there's no 4 acts isn't really the standard way of writing a screenplay. The screenplays are written in 3 acts
Mhm.
because there's a beginning, then there's the middle, which is twice as long as the beginning. And there's the end, which is about the same length as the beginning. It's standard since forever. They've been doing it that way. But for commercials, they started dividing things into 4 acts. And yet this, I believe, was on one of the networks that didn't have commercials. So they didn't have to break it up into 4 acts. It gets all...
I think this was 3 acts, if I remember, but I have to look at the script again. But
Well, yeah, this was written in 3 acts?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I could be wrong.
Usually when they're doing the single camera shows for streaming or one of the networks where they don't do commercials, they don't even indicate the acts.
Mhm.
They just write it straight through. Like screenplay, although it's written in 3 acts, you as a writer know where those acts are, so you know where the turning points and such are, and the
Mhm.
midpoint of the second act, but you don't indicate it. We're on a multiple camera show, you actually indicate act one, and where act one breaks and where act two starts, and you do that because you're placing commercials, and so you have to be very careful about describing where the acts are, where the scenes are.
Mhm.
But in something that doesn't have commercials, you pretty much play it straight through. The only people who worry about the acts are really the writers who are thinking,
Right.
because that's the structure of good storytelling,
Right.
in that proportion and laid out that way.
Yeah, and you have to track the story, so that where you're at in terms of like how the movement of the story is going based on what act you're in and where the conflict should be, and yeah, that's
And in the second act, there's always a midpoint of a second act in a 3-act structure. So when you turn it into 4 acts, all you have to do is make the midpoint an act break. It's really easy to do, but they still do it for commercials, not because it makes a better
artistic
template for your writing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's actually interesting, right? Because it's like so much of our what we understand artistically has been based off of some type of commercialism, like we've been guided by, Tide and Maytag and whatever, I don't know, I'm thinking about clothing stuff right now, but okay, so let's see what else this.
Yeah, let's move on.
This is just kind of a montage, so we're not going to do all the scenes here, but let's see.
I was going on a date with some corny dude. Yeah, some corny dude. What? No, this is a great environment for you.
That was kind of a good little joke, and
yeah,
I like that one. Here's some a little bit of the.
Yeah, this is a little like.
This bitch is amazing. Come on, you really think I'm here for money?
I like this scene with the parents.
Yes. I'm looking for Alfred. Also, could you pick up Lottie from Kai's? I'm getting a job and Van's on a date.
You got a job?
Hey, good for her.
Yes, I got a job. And thanks, Mom. I'm your son, Ern. I used to live in there with you, remember?
Used to. There was a turd the size of my arm waiting for me when I got home yesterday.
That wasn't me.
It was you. I checked. You better eat something real. Instead all them candies and cookies and whatever other stuff was in there.
Did you break it up with a stick?
See, we talked about that. That was kind of like more of the kind of a gross, like.
That's again showing you how
detail.
In this kind of streaming shows, in this kind of realism, that they can say things like that, which you wouldn't do on a regular network programming. But I didn't really care for it anyhow. I just thought it was for. I don't know what the purpose was. I guess it made some people laugh with embarrassment or discomfort or discovery that it was something that's not normally spoken about. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
I didn't particularly think that was necessary. But.
I thought the only thing that was interesting about that in that particular scene is it establishes that he was lurking in their house with them not being around. So like, he's probably there to scrounge up food or something. Like he's not as independent as he'd like to be, at this
Yeah, no,
this
I
phase of his
agree.
life.
And it worked. It worked. It just, again, I always use this word low effort thinking, which is something somebody told me about not too long ago, which explains so much to me. People who have an answer and satisfies them, so they're ready to move on instead of analyzing that answer a little bit or seeing, can I make the answer a little bit better? Can I make it more interesting? Or is there more here going on than I would think? No, low effort thinkers just, if it got them through the moment, they're on to the next thing.
Yeah, and in this scene right here too, they're smoking weed, which is, I can only think of that '70s show where they implied weed, which is different. Network's not going to really promote drug use, to the youth of the youth audience. So, but here, when you're on, and this is what was this, A&E? I think this was A&E. So they're a little bit more brazen with it, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I don't know where it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I like this meeting. They're in the couch in the field.
Not asking for money.
I thought that was kind of.
Ain't you homeless?
Not real homeless. I'm not using a rat as a phone or something.
Don't be racist, man. Like, that make you schizophrenic. That don't make you homeless.
Wait. Not
See, okay, so that's a joke right there, right? So
yeah, that was funny.
He's like, I'm not real homeless. I'm not using a rat as a phone, which is a funny image, right? And then he says, "Don't be racist." That makes you schizophrenic. It clearly doesn't have anything to do with race,
Yeah.
And it must be hot. I mean, this dude's sweating and stuff. It's just an interesting meeting place. In terms of like set locations and like, they need to establish this. I don't know why they go to this couch as like part of their meeting places to conduct official conversations, but
it's like interesting choices. And I mean, in the Big Bang Theory, they were in a sperm bank. You don't see that all the time either.
No,
But they were in the sperm bank a very long time, and then they were in the hallway with Penny for a very long time. Where this has already been in several scenes, and
this is just a montage. This is best moments. This is not full scenes, So, if we were watching the actual show, this scene is much longer, and the original scene with them in bed is much longer. So these are just like short.
Why are we watching a montage?
I don't know. I think like when I downloaded like some clips. That's a good question. I probably should.
Well, it made me look like an idiot.
I probably should have
you should have told me.
I wanted to do where we had like this kind of like what we did with Big Bang Theory, where we had like this scene and then this scene and intro and outro. But yeah, I don't know why we're watching. And in fact, we probably don't have to watch this whole thing.
The funny thing about even these montage, I know it's a montage and very, very short scenes, but I can almost accept this. I guess I did accept it as that these could actually have been very tight, quick scenes to establish the show and move it on quickly. I didn't know this was a montage, but usually montage doesn't have as much dialogue in it, or none. Sometimes montages have no dialogue, but
yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I got this clip from. Just says best moments, so it's not the full thing.
But it gives you a taste. It gives you a taste of what it is. It's so different. It's so different than the other show.
What is this scene? I don't even remember that scene.
I don't remember. That's not from this episode.
Oh, is this just best moments season 1? Oh, we shouldn't. Oh, okay. Yeah, we shouldn't even watch this. I've never even seen it. So this doesn't. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and we talked about those particular.
We talked
moments.
about it now.
Yeah.
I think the big difference between the two shows is very clear to anybody who watches 5 minutes or 2 minutes. The first minute of either show, you just get the difference. Both are entertaining.
Yeah. Tone, huge difference in tone.
Tone,
characters,
style.
Yeah. Dialogue. I like his little like obscure weird references. That I'm not using a cat as a phone. Like it was quicksand, but it was fingers pulling me in. He's got like a quirky kind of sensibility. I like that.
He does. I like what he says, and I like that they were on the couch, and the whole thing about them sitting on the couch smoking weed to me isn't that interesting. I mean, that they were on the couch and they were smoking weed The combination is what's interesting. Smoking weed, I've seen a million times.
Yeah.
In these kinds of shows too. So that's not like that was shocking or that interesting. But the fact they were on the couch and they're discussing his life while they're smoking weed. Anyhow, both shows interested me. Both shows, I would watch both shows from what I'd seen already, even though this was a montage from what I saw of it. And I didn't watch either show.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've seen the pilot of each of them, and I've read about each of them, so that I knew some stuff about Penny and such. But I don't watch much television. There are better things to do with your time.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I mean, if you're always writing, but it's good to like, like take a break from writing. You watch something that you think is kind of fun, and
I know.
I like the analysis stuff too.
No, I'm just teasing.
Oh, I know you are.
I watch television, but probably not as much as the average person. But I do watch television, and I like it. There's a lot of good things, and I am open-minded enough that I can appreciate both of these different versions of comedies. One is a dramatic comedy, and one is a broad, wacky comedy.
You know what's interesting though, because I watched the pilot of Atlanta, and it doesn't like impress upon me all this weird little things that he's doing. And then I went ahead and watched the second episode, but that's pretty much as far as I got. I haven't seen too much more of it. And now I'm watching it again. It makes me want to sit on a couch and smoke some weed and watch the show, because there's actually some like really quirky stuff, like some oddball humor, and I like the oddball stuff. So it was a little bit different than I thought.
And as I said that I would watch both shows, I would rather watch Atlanta. So even though this little bit I've seen of each, there are bigger laughs on The Big Bang Theory, but I really enjoyed the little laughs and the attitude and the characters much more in Atlanta.
That's also okay. So when we were talking about like whether one's an out, I think Atlanta actually is a little bit more of an laugh out loud type of comedy, but because we're not having the audience cue us in, sometimes the jokes go under the radar a little bit more. It seems subtle, right? And maybe the audience has an integral part in establishing comedy, but also teaching us what's funny. Because again, when we were watching The Big Bang Theory, I was like, that shit's not funny. Like, I don't know what they're laughing at. You know what I mean? And that was just
there were times in that I thought weren't funny, and I can guarantee you that if this were The Big Bang Theory and they were doing those jokes about the turd the size of your arm in the toilet, there would be a lot of laughter.
A huge laugh, right? Yeah. Totally. Yeah, and that makes me think like, take like Parks and Rec, right? Like Parks and Rec, when I first watched it was, pretty good or whatever. And we talked about how like it took, at least for me, it took me a couple like I had to watch the show multiple times to try to even find out what was funny about it. I didn't get into it. But then when I watched the whole thing all the way through and then went back and watched different episodes, things became funnier because it gives you that sense of like, when you watch a comedy movie over and over again, you find little things that are funny about it that you missed the first couple of viewings. Whereas like a Big Bang Theory or something like that, they're already establishing that this is a joke with each little audience laugh, so you're not it's not as subjective. It's more like, they're telling you, right? So
you don't miss the jokes in Big Bang Theory and have to catch them later. They're there, boom, they hit you in the face.
Yeah.
Pow, there's a joke. Pow, there's a joke. And they're funny jokes. So so that's okay. But I just prefer the subtleties and not just subtleties, the texture and the feel and the taste and the things that just happen, and something that has more drama in it. The comedies, which is how I made my living for most of my career, they're just the comedy. It's just a comedy. The stories have to hold together, or you would it wouldn't work. But they're not like, it just doesn't feel. It feels like a stage play. And it's also in the way it's set up with the 4 cameras and only a few sets. But the other feels more like life.
Yeah,
and I prefer that. I prefer the more lifelike experience. So I would watch them both, but if both were on at the same time in the old days when you could only watch one or the other, I would watch Atlanta.
Yeah.
Unless I was really depressed. If I was really depressed, I'd probably watch The Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, Big Bang Theory just seems like something I would watch if it were on, and I did, like I said, didn't have the ability to change the channel or whatever. But preference-wise, Atlanta is much more of my interest, even though I've seen way more of Big Bang Theory, but it's been on longer. So, yeah, I think, in terms of the looking at the different way they set up the characters and stuff, yeah, it's fun. It's a fun way to think about it, like in terms of writing and picking up things apart and looking at the shows in a different way other than just being entertained by them.
Yeah, once you become, some of you already are professional writers who are listening. Those of you who aren't, you'll realize that once you start doing that for a living, you start looking at it a little differently, in that you write for your audience, your primary audience, but you're always writing also for other writers, including yourself, where you say, okay, I know if I did this thing like the line I said before about what do you guys do for fun, that if some people were going to pick that apart in the room, so I would just fix it, because it'd be so easy to say, what do you guys do for what do you do, what do you guys do around here that's interesting, or what do you do with your time? There's just a lot of ways you could have said that, but once you said fun, it wasn't consistent with what we saw. It wasn't fun at all. Right. But then you could rationalize and say, well, Sheldon was purposely, maybe it was fun for him and he didn't want to admit it before. So it's all nitpicky stuff, but that's what you do when you're a professional writer. You start thinking about every word choice you make, every word.
Yeah. Not that you do specs or anything anymore, but it'd be interesting to see like what a spec of, a Ken Eston spec of Atlanta or a Ken Eston spec of Big Bang, that'd be interesting to see, like, because I'm thinking like which one would I spec? I probably would spec the Atlanta, because I have more like, just naturally more relation to that show more. But I think Big Bang is, I think Big Bang is spec Big Bang.
I would spec Big Bang only because I started on a sitcom, and I worked most of my life on most of my professional life on a sitcom. And I just have a sense that I could do it better, that I know I could do it really well. And since I've done so little of this dramedy, which sometimes they call these, like Atlanta, that I'm not sure, I wouldn't have as much confidence. So I'd probably choose the one I was more confident in my ability to write. But as a viewer, I'd prefer to watch the other one. That's a weird kind of paradox here. I'd write one, but I'd like to watch the other one more.
Which, like, in terms of, and also with voice, right? Like the voice of the show. Do you think you'd be more? It's an easier grab, right, for you to do the Big Bang than to do Atlanta. But I think the voice of the show for Atlanta, even for me, would be like sort of a stretch, right? Because it's like, I think I would get in the weeds with the quirkiness stuff. Like I like that kind of humor, and then I sometimes have the more, I guess, realistic based stuff, like is, like if I had to say like strength or weaknesses, like the jokey joke stuff on Big Bang, I think is an easier grab for me. And even if it's like a thin story, then, you're just throwing joke. That's probably a little bit easier. But yeah, I think Atlanta maybe it would be a little bit more of a challenge. If I had to spec one, I probably would spec Atlanta, though, just because I'd like the challenge of it to see if I could do that, maybe put it in the drawer or something like that, and then do a Big Bang. I don't know. It's just an interesting thought.
It's interesting because I think we're both agreeing that both are valid, solid entertainment. So,
but so different.
It just depends on the mood you're in. You know, which one you'd rather watch.
Yeah.
I know I could watch Big Bang Theory and enjoy it. I know I could watch Atlanta and enjoy it. And what's the mood right now? I'm in a mood where I'd rather watch Atlanta. But as I said, if I came home and I had a hard day, I was a little depressed, and I didn't want to think at all. I don't mean that as a put down to the writers.
No, but it's not. You're not challenged. Like you said, it's not challenged.
Yeah, you're not challenged. You're not challenged. But it's the writers still. The duty of the writers to entertain you for half an hour, and they both do that. They both do that.
Yeah, these are good. This is a good analysis of these shows. I liked it. So
and they're so different. Do some more. It's amazing. It's like normally you'd I would more apt to think of doing the Big Bang Theory and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Because they're very similar. But we picked two very different, but they're both in the comedy genre, which is a weird thing. So we picked two things in the comedy genre, but they're so different.
I'd be down to do It's Always Sunny. I like that show. Always Sunny, and then like something, radically different or something. I kind of like how you said, like, they're such different styles of comedy. Like, we talked about, we'll talk about other shows, and we have some coming up, but I think it's fun to do things that are similar, like, in terms of pilots, but also things that are just so different in terms of tone and setup and multicam, single cam, like it's a variety.
We talked about Barney Miller and Brooklyn Nine-Nine. They're both about cops in a precinct that isn't real, because neither one of those precincts is real.
In the future, we talked about it. But
or I mean, you and I have talked about it. We haven't talked about it on the podcast yet, but
no, that's cool. Yeah,
I think we should.
That's a great idea. I think we should do that. Yeah, that'd be good. I do think, doing these analysis and stuff like that is interesting, especially it's also cool I really like getting your take on, like, these shows, and like, like the thing that you're saying about peppering and laughter, and like, that real, like, hands-on experience type of
one other
analysis.
thing I wanted to say about laughter. I may have said this before, but forgive me because I'm very old. I don't remember what I say, but that I always like the sound of laughter, and I think almost everybody does. So I compare. Some people say they hate laugh tracks. Laugh tracks are awful, but I compare it to scoring a very dramatic scene with music. If you take the same scene without music and it flattens out, you put music in it and it heightens up the tension and the drama. And nobody objects to putting music in that's not really in the scene.
Yeah.
You're just adding that to manipulate your audience.
Yeah.
So why is it wrong to manipulate your audience with another sound, which is laughter, which is a sound that automatically uplifts you? So you take a kind of mediocre joke, add laughter to it. That laughter has boosted your audience's appreciation level, and you've improved your joke by the score you've added to it, the laugh score you've added to it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point. Yeah, because with music, I mean, I guess the wrong music, and if all of a sudden you throw in a upbeat, accordion sound or something in a funeral scene or whatever, it's gonna feel off. But I mean, music is such an emotional manipulation, and it comes in so subtly, and you don't even know it's on for a little bit, and then you're caught up in the scene, and you're like, But laughter, there's this premise that laughter has to be genuine, and deserved, or else it can't
I don't know why that is. Yeah, it is strange, because it's just another sound. It's a sound. It's a sound. It's just a sound, like a musical score. I'm not sure. I'm sure there's a psychological explanation for the perception of the difference, but to me, they're the same. And when somebody says, "Oh yeah, that scene was great," I said, "Well, there was a lot of music in that." Yeah, it really helped. But that scene sucked because they threw in laughter. I say, "Come on, you gotta be a little more open-minded." Laughter is a different kind of score because it works for a different kind of show. A comedy never looks like a drama, even when they're shot in the same single camera or format. When you're in a comedy, and when you're in a drama, and then when you're in a dramedy, which is some hybrid between the two. So it's all very confusing. Art is very confusing to explain. Before I started teaching it, I never thought about any of these things because it's just so hard to explain it.
It's very unusual. That's a good point. I mean, I think that's an excellent, I just think that's very fascinating. Like, we have no issue with music coming in and just because music really changes your mood and everything. I've gotten to the point now where, like, I was talking about this with a buddy of mine. I don't actually listen to music anywhere near as much as I used to, just because I don't want to be put in some weird mood unexpectedly. You know what I mean? Like, if you hit a weird song and all of a sudden you become pensive and the rest of the day you're contemplating all this, stuff that you can't control in your past. It's like I'll listen to, talk radio or something, something that doesn't really involve me emotionally.
Yeah, and then you get some talk radio where some guy says that some racist thing just pisses you off, and then you go off again. You were trying to listen to Dodger talk,
Yeah,
and you end up with the guy saying some racist remark about a player. Or
I used to listen to classical music because classical music I used to say it like has respect for you, that it doesn't try to take over your thinking, like it just kind of melds into the background. It depends on what you're listening to, what kind of classical, but chamber music or something chill and subtle,
But classical music can really manipulate you up and down, and you can almost get giddy with some of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain classical music songs that's the Lone Ranger theme is really based on the William Tell overture. What's it called? The William Tell. Anyhow, but I've heard it so many. I used to hear it as a kid all the time. Would start the Lone Ranger. Then when I hear it as a piece of classical music, it makes me giggle because I go, "Well, that's not classical music. That's the theme song to the Lone Ranger."
Or like the Flight of the Bumblebee, that tune or whatever. Like you hear it so often. But so if you took like the Lone Ranger and then threw that in the middle of a funeral scene, or something that's supposed to be weighty, then it like becomes jarring. People who scored stuff, they do that's an art form unto itself. And maybe one day we should actually get that would be fascinating, actually, to get people who score comedies and see how
both. I'd like to talk to somebody who scores the music and dramas, and somebody who does the laughs to a comedy, because the thing about the laughs comedy, I play the banjo, and the banjo is limited in its range. Most of the banjo music is kind of like happy, upbeat stuff. So, and I wish I had played the guitar or the piano, which has a bigger range. Well, that's a big deal. Music has a huge range, and laughter, though it does have a range, it doesn't have the breadth. It just there's hard laughs, little laughs, there's giggles, there's chuckles, there's guffaws, but there's still, it's very limited compared to, maybe people just get bored with the sound of laughter. Though I never get it. I always.
That's what we should do. We should talk to somebody who mixes in audience laughter.
Yeah,
that'd be pretty fascinating. I don't know, like if that's just like a sound engineer, or if that's like, that'd be fascinating.
When I was doing Taxi and Cheers, there were a couple guys in the business who were specialists, and all they did was laughter.
That's interesting.
And that they was especially, it wasn't a sound engineer. You had to make an appointment to bring in the laugh guy who'd come in and work with your sound engineers and your all your production people and work the laughter in.
Yeah.
So it was done like music. It wasn't done just thrown in there. It was done volumes and tracks, and what laughs on this track, what's laughs on that track. And it was done as a science, and it was also done as an art.
I just imagine like some goofy guy coming in who's got like a goofy laugh, but they're probably very serious because they've been listening to laughter this whole time. Laughter is probably like the last thing they really want to hear, like. But I just imagine some goofy guy.
It's funny seeing the sketch. Also, I was thinking, you've seen orchestras, you've seen people playing in bands.
Yeah,
they ought to have an orchestra of laughter people.
Yeah.
Here's your tenor laughter, and
the conductor. Laughter, like with the doing the rhythms. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
But I'd like to have them on the same show. The music editor or composer and the laugh specialist too, and have them talk about the subtleties that they hear. I mean, these laugh guys hear different kinds of laughter. And when you say, I want this to be not such a big laugh there, but he doesn't just push the volume up. He'll push who's laughing. Is it more men laughing than women, or women than men, or is it a good mix? He's thinking of all that stuff. He's an artist.
Yeah, and stand-ups are always talking about like, a hard laugh, like, because like a guttural laugh, like they're laughing in spite of themselves, like they can't help but laugh. And then sometimes you get those pity laughs, or like the moan laugh, or like they're uncomfortable, like that uncomfortable nervous laugh. It's very, there's a broad range. And I was reading the SNL book a long time ago, and Lauren Michaels there's a comment in there. He's either quoted as saying it, or it was a quote, because it probably wasn't directly from him, but he was saying, yeah, I got a laugh, but was it the right laugh? So he was differentiating whether or not, and they had all these rules, like you don't have like funny names, because that's kind of like not like Mr. Camp and stuff, or some stupid name, like you have like a regular name, but the character is funny. They have all these interesting rules that they follow, and then you see another camp like Mad TV or something like that, and they kind of break those forms, and you hear the difference, and it's whether it draws you in or not is depending on what camp you're in, but
that's why it's like all this is in the art world. That's why so many people are drawn to show business, because the littlest things can be so fascinating, and they're all about touch and feel. And it's not like sitting down doing math equations, doing bookkeeping. Well, sometimes bookkeeping can be very creative, but
also it's a lot of that is because of our culture. Like, we understand our culture. You have to know the audience that you're approaching, right? Like, when you were in China, what they thought was funny was radically different than what we accept as being funny, and so yeah, it's all very fascinating. I'll definitely look into that and like see if we can book some people to bring on the show and like talk about that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I think it's really David Lloyd who wrote an episode of the Mary Tyler Moore Show that's considered the funniest episode ever written. The number one. By the way, mine's picked in I have one that's in the top 5.
You do?
Mm-hmm.
What episode?
Elegant Iggy, A Taxi.
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, at least there's one book. There's one book picked in the top 5, and it named the other ones. One was Veggie Vitamin by Lucille Ball and I Love Lucy. And the top one was, I think, the Mary Tyler Moore Chuckles Bites of Dust. I don't remember what they all were, but anyway, my point was he went to France, which you'd think France isn't that different. It's like you went to some culture that's been isolated from us, like China. We have pretty much been isolated in a lot of ways. France, we've had a long-term, very close relationship with. And yet when he went to France and they showed this is in America considered the top sitcom ever, and they didn't laugh at all. They didn't like it at all. He didn't know what to do at the end when they question and answer with he was expecting all these people to be asking him all these things. How do you think of that stuff? Well, you're a genius.
Yeah.
And they're all they didn't have questions because they thought it wasn't any good at all.
Wow.
They didn't like anything about it.
Yeah, it's definitely cultural. Comedy is
And
definitely
one
cultural.
thing that I'm on a run here. I got to finish one more train of thought in that. To a class of mine, I once showed more than once. One semester, I showed the pilot to Cheers, which won an Emmy that year for the best single episode of sitcoms, and it's launched a series that ran for 12 years. And I showed it to 3 audiences of kids, of young adults who were students of mine, and they all disliked it.
Interesting.
They all disliked it. How could it change that many? Hadn't been that many years at that point in my life, and none of them liked it. They didn't like the pilot at all, and yet it had been considered the best.
That is interesting.
It is strange.
Yeah. I mean, like what plays for comedy, because not only is it like comedy is very contemporary. Comedy usually is very like of the moment. Like jokes that if you go back and look at stand up, there's certain people that last the time. Like last the span of time, like Carlin or different people, whatever. But like his 7 words you can't say on television or whatever, now that's completely different. So, I wonder if that would hold up, so yeah, it's interesting. Some comedies has a greater life, or what do we call it? Shelf life than other.
Yeah. I just about 2 weeks ago, I got a residual check from a pilot that I wrote and shot that never went on the air.
Mm-hmm.
I got a residual check. I'm not sure how that happened.
That's cool.
What
Yeah.
happened was, what it means is somebody somewhere decided to show this, but how they even know it existed because it never got on the air. And somebody decided what it was worth because they sent me a check for what they considered was my share of a residual for that show. But when I read it, and I read the name of the show, and I just for a moment it didn't register. And then wait, that's a pilot I wrote a lifetime ago. I mean, literally, I was probably when I wrote that pilot, I probably was 30, and now I'm much, much older than that. And yet I get this residual out of the blue. Somebody showed it somewhere enough that they had to pay for it.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's crazy. That's a nice little check, right? To just get in the mail, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was. But it also shows you. So some of these hold up. So it didn't work then, but it worked 40 years later. Now it does work.
Yeah. But it's also a mood thing, like even not just society, but like sometimes I watched, like Spaceballs, for example. When I was a kid, I loved it. And then there was a time where I was like, I watched it and I was like, I can't watch this anymore. I don't like this movie. And then I watched it years later and I was like, this is actually pretty funny. Like I don't have to take myself so seriously. Like it's okay to be, like this kind of humor. So yeah, things come in, like you grow with the comedy and then, sometimes you grow out of the comedy. But that's what I was saying too, like with Buster Keaton, right? Like he's one of those people that like kind of has a really long shelf life because physical comedy really like appeals to all types of people, all kinds of cultures. They would make somebody laugh from, anywhere around the world, but
I ran into a guy the other day who was in a retirement facility, a care facility. So he was quite old.
Mm-hmm.
And he said his favorite movie ever was Spaceballs, the one.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's funny.
How could that be your favorite movie ever? Yeah, it was funny, but
yeah,
your favorite movie ever?
Yeah, it's actually pretty funny. There's some funny stuff in there, but yeah, it's one of those like your favorite movie of all time. That's pretty interesting. Yeah. So I guess we're gonna head out right now, but
time to feed the chickens.
Yeah, and who should we say happy birthday to?
Happy birthday to Beatrice.
Beatrice, okay, yeah. Beatrice hasn't gotten too many shouts out, so
she doesn't people don't shout out to her very often anymore.
No.
It was once a popular name.
Yeah. Right. That's another thing, names change too, but we could talk about that later. But all right, well, this was a good one. So yeah, we will get this up and running, and then we'll stay in touch with getting the next one going.
Yeah, and I think we should do an episode about Barney Miller and Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
I like that idea. Yeah, that'd be good.
A nice comparison.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. All right, cool. So I will talk to you soon, and have a good week.
You too.
All right.
Take care.